Major Daniel Cross grabbed the microphone, pointed straight at the quiet woman in the third row, and shouted so every single one of the 300 soldiers could hear him. "You, the little map lady, get up here. Let's see if all that fancy paperwork keeps you alive when a real enemy is trying to put you in the ground." He laughed, and half the field laughed with him. "Because from where I'm standing, sweetheart, you look like somebody who'd faint at the sound of a rifle." What he did not know, what nobody on that field knew, was that the woman he had just humiliated had survived things that would have broken him in a single afternoon. If you love stories where the person everyone underestimated finally gets the respect they earned, then hit that subscribe button right now and stay with me all the way to the end, because this one is going to give you chills. And do me a favor, drop the name of the city where you're watching from in the comments so I can see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The morning air over Fort Liberty, North Carolina felt heavy, the way it always did before something ugly was about to happen. 300 soldiers stood in tight formation, their boots planted, their spines straight, their faces frozen in that blank expression soldiers wear when they are ordered to watch and forbidden to speak. They had been told this was a leadership demonstration. They had been told it would test discipline, courage, and combat readiness. What they had not been told was that it was about to become the most talked about morning in the history of that base. At the front of the formation, pacing back and forth like a man who owned the ground he walked on, was Major Daniel Cross. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had never once lowered an apology. Everyone on that base knew his reputation. Cross was a battlefield commander, an old-school warrior who believed that a soldier's worth could be measured in muscle and speed, in how loud a man could shout and how hard he could hit. He had come up through the ranks the hard way, and he wore that history like armor. To Cross, war was simple. The strong survived, the weak did not. And the ones who hid behind computer screens, the analysts and the planners and the intelligence officers, they were not real soldiers at all. They were, in his words, tourists. He stopped pacing. He turned. And his eyes landed on the one person in that entire formation he had already decided to destroy. Captain Emily Carter stood in the third row, hands at her sides, chin level, eyes forward. She was not large. She was not loud. She had one of those calm, watchful faces that most people walked right past without a second glance. For 2 years now, she had worked at Fort Liberty as an intelligence officer, studying maps, tracking enemy patterns, predicting movements before they happened. The soldiers who knew her name knew her as the woman behind the screens, quiet, polite, always the first one in and the last one out. Some of them respected her. Most of them barely noticed her. Major Cross noticed her. He noticed her the way a bully notices the smallest kid on the playground. "Captain Carter," he said, and his voice carried across the whole field. "Step forward." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Emily Carter stepped out of the formation and walked to the front, her boots making soft, even sounds against the ground. She stopped a respectful distance from the major and came to attention. "Sir," she said. "Just that, one word." Cross looked her up and down slowly, letting the silence stretch, letting every soldier feel the discomfort of it. He wanted them to watch. He wanted them uncomfortable. That was the point. "You know what I've got here, Captain?" he said, gesturing at the 300 men and women behind her. "I've got warriors, fighters, people who train their bodies until they can carry a wounded brother 2 miles under fire. And then I've got you." He let the word hang there like something spoiled. "The intelligence officer. The one who tells us where the enemy is from the comfort of an air-conditioned room 300 miles from the shooting." A few soldiers shifted, a few smirked. Most kept their faces blank, but Emily could feel the mood of the crowd bending toward the major, the way crowds always bend toward the loud man who seems certain of himself. "I've been in this army 22 years. Cross went on, walking a slow circle around her, now forcing her to hold still while he moved. "And in 22 years, I have learned one thing that has never once let me down. When the bullets start flying, all your maps, all your charts, all your fancy predictions, they mean nothing. What matters is whether you can stand your ground when a man twice your size is coming to end your life. So let me ask you something, Captain Carter. In front of all these good people who bleed for this country, do you honestly believe you belong on the same field as them?" The field went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Emily Carter did not flinch. She did not look down. She looked the major directly in the eye and said in a voice that was quiet but perfectly steady, "I believe every soldier belongs where the mission needs them, sir." It was a good answer, a wise answer, a diplomatic answer, and it was exactly the wrong thing to say to a man like Daniel Cross because it did not give him the fear he was hunting for. His smile tightened. "That's a lot of pretty words," he said, "but words don't win fights, Captain. So how about we skip the philosophy and find out what you're actually made of?" Somewhere in the formation, a young private muttered under his breath to the soldier next to him, "This is going to be bad." He had no idea how right he was, though not in the way he thought. Cross turned to his right to a soldier standing at the edge of the demonstration area. "Sergeant Reyes," he called, "front and center." Sergeant Marcus Reyes stepped forward, and a low murmur ran through the crowd. Reyes was a mountain of a man, 6'4", built like a door, one of the strongest hand-to-hand instructors on the entire base. He had won 3 combatives tournaments. He had never, not once in anyone's memory, been beaten on the mat by anyone, let alone by an intelligence officer half his size. Sergeant Cross said, loud enough for the back rows to hear, "Captain Carter here thinks the mission needs her. I'd like you to give her a little demonstration of what the mission actually looks like. Nothing dangerous, just a basic combatives exercise. Show her what it feels like when the enemy doesn't care about her charts." Reyes hesitated. To his credit, he glanced at Emily with something like discomfort in his eyes. He was a soldier, not a bully, and he did not enjoy being handed the role of hammer. "Sir," he said carefully, "with respect, she's a captain." "This isn't really—" "That was an order, Sergeant," Cross said flatly. Reyes closed his mouth. He looked at Emily. "Ma'am," he said quietly, almost like an apology, "I'll go easy." And here is where the first crack appeared in Major Cross's perfect little morning, though he was far too pleased with himself to see it. Because Emily Carter looked up at the mountain of a man in front of her, this instructor who had never been beaten, and instead of fear, instead of nerves, something changed in her eyes. It was subtle, it was quick. If you had blinked, you would have missed it. But it was the look of a person who has just been handed something they recognize. The look of someone stepping back into a room they used to live in. "You don't have to go easy on my account, Sergeant," she said softly. "But thank you for offering." Reyes blinked. Something in her tone made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, though he could not have said why. The two of them squared off in the center of the circle. 300 soldiers leaned forward without moving their feet. Major Cross crossed his arms and settled back on his heels, wearing the satisfied expression of a man who has already scripted the ending in his head. In his version, Reyes would take her down gently in about 4 seconds. The captain would get up, embarrassed and humbled, and every soldier on that field would learn the lesson Cross wanted taught. That strength was everything, that the quiet ones were nothing. That was his version. Reality had other plans. Reyes moved first because he was too polite to make her start it, and because a small, foolish part of him still thought this was going to be a gentle little lesson. He reached for her, a slow, controlled grab meant to take her wrist and guide her off balance without hurting her. It was the kind of technique he had used 1,000 times to teach nervous new recruits. Emily was not there when his hand closed. She had already moved not backward, not away, but at an angle, a small, economical step that put her just outside the path of his reach. It was such a slight movement that half the crowd did not even register it. But Reyes registered it. Reyes, who had spent 15 years reading bodies, felt something cold slide down his spine. Because that was not a beginner's dodge. That was not luck. That was training. Deep, old, instinctive training. He recovered, fast, resetting, and this time he came at her seriously, dropping his weight, closing the distance, moving to control her the way he would control a real opponent. The crowd held its breath, and then it happened. It happened so fast that later when the soldiers told the story to their friends, none of them could agree on exactly what they saw. One moment, Sergeant Reyes' 300 pounds of muscle and momentum was driving forward. The next moment, his own weight was carrying him past her, his balance stolen out from under him by something she had done with a shift of her hip and a twist of her hands, something too smooth and too fast to follow. He hit the ground, hard. The impact sent a dull thud across the field. For 1 full second, nobody breathed. Sergeant Marcus Reyes, the man who had never been beaten, was flat on his back, staring up at the sky with Captain Emily Carter standing calmly over him, having barely broken a sweat. The silence shattered. Someone in the back gasped. Someone else swore. A ripple of stunned noise rolled through the 300 soldiers like a wave. and Major Daniel Cross's arms came uncrossed. The smile was gone from his face now, completely gone. He stared at the scene in front of him as if his own eyes were lying to him. This was not the script. This was not how it was supposed to go. Down on the ground, Reyes was already recovering from his shock. And here is the thing that mattered most about that moment. He was not angry. He was not embarrassed. A slow grin was spreading across his face, the grin of a professional who has just witnessed something rare and beautiful. He knew better than anyone else on that field that he had just been beaten cleanly by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Emily reached down and offered him her hand. He took it. She helped the mountain to his feet. "Ma'am," Reyes said quietly, brushing the dust off his uniform, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Where did you learn to do that?" Emily gave him the smallest of smiles. "Long story, Sergeant," she said. But Major Cross had heard enough, or rather he had seen enough, and what he had seen had done something dangerous to a man like him. It had made him look foolish in front of 300 soldiers. And there is no animal on earth more reckless than a proud man who has just been made to look foolish in front of the people he leads. "All right," Cross said, and his voice had changed. The showmanship was gone. Now there was an edge in it, something raw and personal. "All right, that was a nice trick. Reyes went easy on you, didn't he? Took it slow, didn't want to hurt the lady." He was walking toward her now, slowly, and the crowd could feel the temperature of the whole demonstration change. "But you and I both know that's not how the enemy plays. So how about this, Captain? How about you stop hiding behind sergeants who feel sorry for you and you face somebody who doesn't?" Emily's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes grew very still. "Sir," she said carefully, "I don't think that's necessary. The sergeant fought fairly. There's nothing more to prove here." "Oh, I think there's plenty to prove," Cross said. He stopped a few feet from her. Up close, the size difference between them was almost comical. He towered over her. He outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds. "See, I've been doing this a long time, and I've seen people get lucky. I've seen people memorize one slick move and pull it out at the right second to embarrass a man. But luck runs out, Captain. Skill doesn't. So let's find out which one you've got." A voice cut through the crowd. It was Reyes. "Sir," he said, stepping forward, and there was real concern in his tone now. "Sir, I don't think that's a good idea, respectfully." Cross did not even look at him. "Nobody asked you, Sergeant." "Sir, I'm telling you, I said stand down," Cross barked, and the finality in it snapped Reyes's mouth shut. 300 soldiers watched motionless as the major turned back to the small woman in front of him. And in that moment, some of them, the sharper ones, the ones who had been paying attention, began to feel something they could not quite name. A sense that they were watching a man walk toward a cliff in the dark, absolutely certain the ground would hold. Because Emily Carter was not afraid. She should have been afraid. Every instinct in that crowd told them that a captain who valued her career should be afraid of embarrassing a major, and a woman that size should be afraid of a man that big. But Emily Carter was standing there with a calm that did not belong to a frightened person. It belonged to something else, something colder and older and far more experienced. "Sir," she said one last time, and her voice was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it more unsettling. "I'm asking you to reconsider. Not for my sake, for yours." That did it. That single sentence, that quiet suggestion that she was worried about protecting him, lit something in Daniel Cross that could no longer be put out. "For my sake," he repeated, and he laughed, but it was an ugly laugh now, stripped of all its earlier confidence. "You hear that?" he called out to the field, spreading his arms. "The map lady is worried about my safety." A scattering of nervous laughter answered him, but it was thinner than before, much thinner. The mood on that field had turned, and even a man as blind as Cross could feel the ground shifting under his boots, though he was too far gone to stop now. "Tell you what, Captain, since you're so concerned, let's make it official. Right here, right now, you and me. No sergeants, no excuses. Just show these soldiers whether the intelligence officer can back up all her big quiet talk." Emily Carter looked at him for a long moment, and then slowly she nodded. "All right, sir," she said quietly, "if that's what you want." She stepped into the circle, and somewhere deep in the memory of Captain Emily Carter, a door she had kept shut for a very long time began quietly to open. Nobody on that field knew her real history. That was the whole point of it. That was how it was supposed to plan. For years, Emily had built her life around being underestimated, around being the quiet one, the forgettable one, the woman behind the screen. There had been a time, years earlier in a chapter of her life, that most of her current colleagues would never be cleared to read about, when Emily Carter had been someone very different. When she had worn a very different kind of uniform, or sometimes no uniform at all. When she had operated in places that did not appear on any map she was allowed to discuss alongside people whose names were classified and whose skills were the reason certain disasters never made the news. She had walked away from all of that. She had chosen the quiet life, the analyst's chair, the screens and the maps, precisely because she was tired of being the person who had to end things. She had wanted peace. She had wanted to use her mind instead of her hands. She had wanted more than anything to never again be the most dangerous person in a room. And now here was Major Daniel Cross, a man who knew nothing about any of that, demanding that she become that person again in front of 300 soldiers on a training field for no reason other than his own wounded pride. Emily felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not fear, not anger, sadness. A quiet, deep sadness for a man who was about to learn a lesson he had begged for. "Whenever you're ready, sir," she said. Cross did not wait. He came at her fast, and there was nothing gentle about it, none of the courtesy Reyes had shown. He came like a man trying to end something, trying to erase the embarrassment of the last few minutes with one decisive display of dominance. He was strong, he was quick for his size, and against 99 out of 100 opponents that charge would have worked. Emily Carter was the 100th. She did not meet his strength with strength. She never had. That was the whole art of it, the thing Cross had never understood and never would. She read the charge, read his weight, read the exact line his momentum wanted to travel, and instead of fighting it, she borrowed it. A pivot, a shift, a redirection of force so subtle that to the untrained eyes in the crowd, it looked almost like she had done nothing at all, and yet the result was undeniable. Major Daniel Cross, 22 years in the Army, feared battlefield commander, went stumbling past her, clawing at empty air, fighting to keep his feet under him. The crowd made a sound, a collective intake of breath. Cross caught himself, spun around, his face darkening. "Lucky," he spat, and he came again. This time he was more careful, more controlled, circling her, looking for an opening, respecting her a little now, even though his mouth would never admit it. Emily let him circle. She did not chase. She simply turned with him. Calm, centered her hands, relaxed her weight, balanced, watching him the way a person watches weather. They have seen 1,000 times before and know exactly how it will break. "You know," she said softly, and only he was close enough to hear it. "You're actually not bad, sir. You've got real instincts. If someone had taught you patience, you'd have been something." It was not mockery. That was the strange thing. It was almost gentle, almost a compliment. And that more than any insult could have drove Daniel Cross out of his mind. He lunged. What happened next took less than 2 seconds, and it would be talked about at Fort Liberty for years to come. Emily Carter stepped inside his reach, closer than any sane fighter would go to a man his size, and in doing so, she took away every advantage his strength gave him. His power needed distance. She erased the distance. And in that impossibly tight space, with a technique that came not from any standard Army manual, but from somewhere far more specialized and far more serious, she took his balance, his leverage, and his dignity all at once, and she put Major Daniel Cross flat on his back in the dirt in front of 300 of his own soldiers. The field exploded. Not with cheering. It was too shocked for cheering. It exploded with a wave of noise that was half gasp, half disbelief, the sound of 300 people watching the impossible happen and not knowing what to do with it. Cross lay on his back, staring up at the sky, chest heaving, and for the first time in a very long time, Major Daniel Cross did not know what to say. And then in the middle of all that chaos, Emily Carter did the one thing that changed everything. She did not stand over him in triumph. She did not smile. She did not milk the moment, did not turn to the crowd, did not do a single one of the things a person would be entitled to do after being humiliated the way she had been humiliated. Instead, she crouched down and she extended her hand to the man who had just tried to break her in public. "That's enough, sir," she said quietly, so quietly that only he could hear. "You made your point. Now let me help you up, and let's both walk out of here with something left." For a long moment, Cross just stared at her hand, His pride screamed at him to slap it away. But something else, something buried deep beneath 22 years of certainty was beginning to stir. Confusion. And underneath the confusion, the first faint, unwelcome flicker of shame. He took her hand. She helped him to his feet, and the two of them stood there in the center of the circle, the giant and the analyst, while 300 soldiers stared in absolute silence, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The demonstration was over, but the questions were only beginning. That evening, the base did not talk about anything else. In the mess hall, in the barracks, in the quiet corners, where soldiers gather when the day is done, one name was on everyone's lips: Captain Emily Carter, the map lady, the one who put the major in the dirt. At a corner table, three young soldiers huddled over their trays, and Private Deshaun Willis, the same young man who had muttered, "This is going to be bad," hours earlier, leaned in with wide eyes. "I'm telling you, I was in the third row. I saw the whole thing. She didn't even look like she was trying. Cross came at her like a freight train, and she just wasn't there anymore. And then he was on the ground." "Nobody does that to Reyes," said the soldier across from him, a wiry corporal named Tanner. "Nobody. Reyes has never been beat. Not once. My cousin trained under him. He's a legend." "Well, he got beat today," Deshaun said. "And so did Cross." "That's what I don't get," Tanner said, lowering his voice. "She's an intel officer. She reads maps. Where does a map reader learn to throw a man like Reyes?" The third soldier at the table, a quiet young woman named Alvarez, who had said nothing until now, spoke up softly. "Maybe she didn't always read maps." The other two looked at her. "What do you mean?" Deshaun asked. Alvarez shrugged, but there was something knowing in her expression. "My uncle was a ranger, 20 years, and he used to say the most dangerous people he ever met weren't the loud ones, weren't the big ones. They were the quiet ones you never noticed. The ones who blend in, the ones who make you think they're nobody." She poked at her food. "He said the truly dangerous ones spend their whole lives trying to look ordinary, because ordinary keeps you alive." The table went quiet. "You think Carter's one of those?" Deshaun asked. Alvarez looked up. "I think," she said slowly, "that a woman who can put both Reyes and Cross on the ground in the same morning and then act embarrassed about it is not a woman who reads maps for a living. Not originally, anyway." Across the base, in a small office lit by the glow of a single desk lamp, Captain Emily Carter sat alone, staring at nothing. She had not wanted this. This was the exact opposite of everything she had built her quiet life around. For years, she had worked to disappear, to be unremarkable, to be the last person anyone would look at twice. And in the span of a single morning, all of that careful invisibility had been torn away by a proud man's need to feel big. There was a soft knock at her door. "Come in," she said. The door opened and Sergeant Marcus Reyes stepped in, filling the frame. He looked awkward, this enormous man standing in her small office like a bear that had wandered into a library. "Ma'am," he said, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Sergeant, please." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Reyes said quietly, "That thing you did to me this morning, that takedown. I've been thinking about it all day. And I want you to know something, ma'am." He met her eyes. "I've been doing hand-to-hand for 15 years. I've trained with the best instructors in the Army. And what you did to me, the way you moved, the timing, the economy of it, that's not something you pick up in basic combatives. That's not even something you pick up in the advanced course." He paused. "That's operator level, ma'am. That's the real thing, the kind of thing they only teach in places most soldiers never get to see." Emily said nothing. Her face gave away nothing. "I'm not asking you to tell me anything." Reyes went on carefully. "I know how this works. I know some records are closed for a reason, but I wanted you to know that I saw it. I know what I fought this morning, and it wasn't a map reader." He stood up. "And for whatever it's worth, ma'am, it was an honor to get put on my back by you. I mean that." Emily looked at him for a long moment, and then finally the smallest smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. "That means more than you know." Reyes nodded and turned to go, but at the door he paused. "Ma'am, can I ask you one thing? Not about your record, just one thing." "You can ask." "Why'd you help him up Cross after everything he said to you, after he dragged you out there and tried to humiliate you in front of everybody? You had him beat. You could have left him there. Nobody would have blamed you." He shook his head. "I don't think I could have done it. So why?" Emily was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was soft and far away, as if she were speaking from somewhere much older than this office. Because I've been in rooms, Sergeant, where the difference between the strong and the weak didn't matter at all, where the only thing that mattered was whether you had the discipline to do the right thing when doing the wrong thing would have felt so much better. She looked at him. Anybody can win a fight. Winning a fight is easy. The hard part is deciding what kind of person you're going to be after you've won it. Reyes stared at her. Then he nodded slowly, something like understanding and something like awe settling over his face. "Good night, ma'am," he said quietly. And he left. Emily sat alone again in the glow of her desk lamp, and she wondered not for the first time whether the quiet life she had fought so hard to build was already slipping through her fingers. Because a secret, once it starts to crack, has a way of shattering completely. The next morning, Major Daniel Cross could not stop thinking about the dirt. He had gone to bed thinking about it and woken up thinking about it. The feeling of his own back hitting the ground, the sky above him, the 300 silent faces, and most of all, worst of all, that hand reaching down to help him up. He replayed it over and over, and every time he replayed it, a hot, sick feeling twisted in his gut. He told himself it was anger. He told himself he was furious at having been embarrassed, that he wanted revenge, that he would find some way to reassert his authority. That was the story he preferred because anger was familiar. Anger he understood. But underneath the anger, in a place he did not want to look, there was something else. And the thing he could not get past, the thing that gnawed at him worst of all, was not that she had beaten him. It was that she had helped him up. If she had gloated, if she had stood over him and rubbed his face in it, he could have hated her cleanly and simply. That would have been easy. But she had not gloated. She had knelt down and offered him her hand and told him quietly to walk out with something left. And there was a kind of strength in that, a kind he had never once considered in 22 years of measuring strength and muscle, that he did not know how to fight. He was still turning it over when there was a knock at his office door, and Colonel James Whitfield walked in without waiting for an answer. Cross shot to his feet. "Colonel." Whitfield was an older man, silver-haired, with the kind of calm authority that made loud men like Cross seem small. He was the base commander, and he did not make casual visits to the offices of majors. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, studying Cross with an expression that was impossible to read. "Sit down, Daniel," Whitfield said. Cross sat. The colonel did not sit. He walked slowly to the window and looked out over the base for a long moment before he spoke. "I heard about your little demonstration yesterday," he said finally. Cross's stomach tightened. "Sir, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," Whitfield said without turning around. "I'm sure you've got a whole speech ready about testing the troops and building character and whatever else. Save it." He turned to face Cross. "I want to ask you something instead. Do you know who Captain Emily Carter is?" Cross frowned. "She's an intelligence officer, sir. Assigned to this base about 2 years ago. Analyzes enemy movement patterns. Keeps to herself." He hesitated. "That's what her file says." "That's what her file says," Whitfield repeated quietly. "And how much of her file were you able to read, Daniel?" Cross went still. "Sir, her file," the colonel said. "How much of it did you actually read before you decided to drag her out in front of 300 soldiers and humiliate her? Because I'm guessing you read the part at the top, the part anybody can read, and then you stopped. Am I right?" Cross said nothing, which was answer enough. Whitfield walked closer and his voice dropped lower. "Let me tell you something about Captain Carter's file, Daniel. Most of it you don't have the clearance to read. I don't have the clearance to read all of it, and I've been in this army for 35 years. There are sections of that woman's record that are locked so far down that the people who lock them are themselves classified." He let that sink in. "You want to know why an intelligence officer put you on your back yesterday? You want to know where a map reader learned to do that? The answer is in the parts of her file you'll never be allowed to see, and I would very strongly suggest that you stop asking the question." Cross felt the ground shifting under him for the second time in 2 days. "Sir," he said slowly, "who is she?" Whitfield looked at him for a long, heavy moment. "She's someone," he said, "who has forgotten more about survival than you will ever learn. She's someone who spent years doing things that kept this country safe in places you've never heard of, against enemies you'll never meet, and who then walked away from all of it because she was tired. Tired of being the most dangerous person in every room she walked into. He shook his head. She came here for peace, Daniel. She came here to be nobody, to read maps and be left alone. And you took that from her. In one morning in front of the whole base, you took the quiet she'd spent years building. He paused. So no, I'm not going to reprimand her for putting you in the dirt. If anything, I'm impressed she showed you as much mercy as she did. Cross sat there, the weight of it pressing down on him. For the first time, the anger began to drain out of him, and in its place came something far more uncomfortable. The slow, cold realization that he had not been fighting a defenseless woman. He had been picking a fight with someone who could have ended him a dozen different ways and had chosen out of pure discipline not to. I didn't know, he said quietly. No, Whitfield agreed. You didn't, because you didn't bother to find out. You looked at a small, quiet woman and you decided you already knew everything about her. The colonel's voice hardened. That's the most dangerous thing a leader can do, Daniel. Decide you already know. It gets people killed. And one day, if you don't fix it, it's going to get your people killed too. He walked to the door, then stopped with his hand on the handle. There's a field exercise coming up, Whitfield said, not turning around. A big one. Operation Silent Horizon. Command wants it to be as realistic as anything we've ever run. Unpredictable. Chaotic. The kind of thing that separates real leaders from loud ones. He paused. I'm assigning you and Captain Carter to run it together. Cross's head came up. Sir, with respect, after yesterday, I don't think... I didn't ask what you think, Whitfield said. You two are going to work together whether you like it or not. And Daniel. He finally turned and his eyes were sharp. Pay attention out there, because I have a feeling that before Silent Horizon is over, you're going to learn something about Captain Carter that no demonstration on a training field could ever teach you. And I have a feeling it's going to change the way you see everything. He opened the door and left, leaving Major Daniel Cross alone with a silence far heavier than the one he had created the day before. Cross sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, the colonel's words circling in his mind. She's someone who has forgotten more about survival than you will ever learn. He thought about the way she had moved, the way she had read him, the way she had known before he even committed to it exactly where his weight was going to go. He had told himself it was luck. He had told himself it was a trick. But somewhere underneath the pride, a part of him had known the truth from the moment his back hit the dirt. That had not been luck. That had not been a trick. That had been something he did not have a name for, and now he was going to have to spend an entire field exercise working shoulder to shoulder with the very person he had tried to destroy. The person who could have destroyed him instead and had chosen not to. He did not know it yet, but the demonstration on the training field had not been the real test. It had only been the opening. The real test, the one that would strip away everything Daniel Cross thought he knew about strength, about leadership, about who deserved respect and who did not, was still ahead of him, waiting out in the chaos of Operation Silent Horizon. Across the base in her small office, Captain Emily Carter received the same news from a young lieutenant who delivered it and then hurried away, clearly aware of the tension the assignment carried. Emily read the assignment order twice. Operation Silent Horizon, CO, led by Major Daniel Cross. She set the paper down and closed her eyes. She had spent years learning how to disappear. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was about to be pulled right back into the light, back into the very kind of chaos she had walked away from, alongside a man who did not yet understand the first thing about her. But there was something else in her expression as she sat there in the quiet. Not dread, not anger, something closer to resolve. Because Emily Carter had learned in that other life, the one locked away in the parts of her file no one could read, that you do not get to choose when the world asks you to be who you really are. You only get to choose whether you answer. And she had never, not once, failed to answer. She opened her eyes, picked up the assignment order, and began quietly and methodically to prepare. Not for a demonstration, not for a fight in a circle in front of a cheering crowd, for something far more real. For the kind of chaos where all the loud confidence in the world means nothing, and the only thing that keeps people alive is the quiet, patient mind of the person everyone underestimated. Out on the training field, the dust from the demonstration had long since settled. But at Fort Liberty, in the minds of 300 soldiers, in the wounded pride of one major, and in the quiet resolve of one captain, something had begun that could not be undone. A question had been planted, and it grew larger with every passing hour, whispered in mess halls and barracks and quiet corners all across the base. Who was Captain Emily Carter really? And what would happen when the base finally found out? The morning operation's silent horizon began. Major Daniel Cross arrived at the staging area an hour early, and Captain Emily Carter was already there. That alone bothered him. He had come early on purpose to be the first to plant himself in charge before she could get any ideas about who ran this exercise. But there she was, standing over a folding table covered in maps and printouts, a coffee going cold beside her, and from the look of the notes scattered across that table, she had not just arrived early. She had been there for hours. Captain Cross said stiffly. Sir, Emily answered without looking up. I pulled the terrain data and the exercise parameters. There's something about them I think we should talk through before the units deploy. Cross bristled. 3 days had passed since the demonstration, 3 days in which he had not spoken more than 10 words to her, 3 days of Colonel Whitfield's warnings circling in his head like a buzzard. And here she was already trying to run things. We deploy in 90 minutes, he said, and the plan's already set. Command laid out the objectives. We push the units to the objectives. We control the tempo. It's not complicated, Captain. Emily finally looked up at him, not with anger, not with challenge, just with that steady, patient calm that Cross was beginning to find deeply unsettling because he could never tell what was behind it. Sir, she said, can I show you something? It'll take 2 minutes. If you still disagree after that, we do it your way. Cross almost said no. Every prideful bone in his body wanted to say no, but Whitfield's voice was in his ear. Pay attention out there. And so grudgingly, he stepped up to the table. Emily tapped a spot on the map. This is the ridge line where command wants us to anchor our defense. Textbook position. High ground, good sight lines, exactly where any instructor would tell you to set up. She moved her finger to a second spot, a shallow depression a mile east. But look at this. This is where the opposing force is going to be staged. And look at the wind data for this week. And look at this dry creek bed here that runs right between the two. She looked up at him. If the opposing force commander is any good, and I've read his file, he's very good. He's not going to attack the ridge. He's going to use that creek bed as a covered approach, come around behind us at first light, and roll up our flank before we even know he's moved. The ridge is a trap. It looks strong. It feels strong, but it's a trap. Cross stared at the map. He wanted to argue. He looked for a reason to argue. And the longer he looked, the more he could not find one because everything she had just said was correct. He could see it now that she had shown him. The dry creek bed, the wind, the staging area. It was all right there, and he had walked right past it because he had been looking at the same textbook high ground everyone always looked at. That's a lot of guessing, he said, because he could not bring himself to say she was right. It's not guessing, sir, Emily said quietly. It's patterns. This is what I do. I've been reading this opposing force commander's movements for 2 years. He does the same thing every time. He makes you look at the obvious threat while the real threat comes from the direction you already decided was safe. She straightened up. But it's your call. You're the ranking officer. I just thought you should have the full picture before you made it. And there it was again. She was not fighting him for control. She was handing him the decision. She had just shown him in 2 minutes that she saw the whole battlefield in a way he did not, and then she had stepped back and let him decide what to do with it. Cross did not have a word for how that made him feel, but it was not a comfortable feeling. It was the feeling of a man realizing the ground he stood on was smaller than he had thought. We'll anchor the ridge, he tried finally, but I'll put a screening element in the creek bed, just in case. It was a compromise. It was as far as his pride would let him bend, and Emily wisely did not push for more. That's a good call, sir, she said, and she meant it. They deployed at dawn. 300 soldiers split into a defending force and an opposing force spread across miles of rough training ground, playing out a war that was not real, but was designed to feel as real as anything short of actual combat. And for the first 2 hours, everything went according to Cross's plan. The units moved to their positions, the ridge was anchored, the screening elements settled into the creek bed. Reports came in over the radio, clean and orderly, and Cross began to relax. He began, in fact, to feel like maybe the demonstration had been a fluke after all, like maybe out here in the real work of commanding soldiers, he was still the one who knew what he was doing. And then at 0840, the radios died. It happened all at once. One moment the command net was alive with chatter, and the next moment there was nothing but static. Cross grabbed the handset, keyed it, called for a status check. Nothing. He tried the backup frequency. Nothing. He tried the third channel. Static. "What is this?" he demanded, turning to his communications sergeant. "Sir, I don't know. We've lost everything, all channels. It's like something's jamming the whole spectrum." "That's part of the exercise," Emily said quietly from beside him. She was not panicking. She was watching Cross with a strange, focused intensity. Command warned us Silent Horizon would include a full communications denial phase. They want to see what happens when the units can't talk to each other. When the leaders can't coordinate. She paused. "This is the test, sir. This is the real one." Cross felt the situation slipping. Without radios, he had no way to command. His 300 soldiers were scattered across miles of terrain, and every one of them had just gone blind and deaf at the same moment. The whole exercise depended on coordination, and coordination depended on the radios, and the radios were gone. "We fall back to standard doctrine," Cross said, thinking fast. "Every unit knows the plan. They hold their positions. They wait for comms to come back. We ride it out." "Sir!" Emily's voice was sharper, now urgent in a way he had not heard from her before. "We can't ride it out. Look." She pulled him back to the map, jabbing at the eastern approach. "The opposing force commander has been waiting for exactly this. The comms denial isn't a hurdle for him, it's an opportunity. Right now, while our units are sitting still waiting for their radios to work, he's moving. And he's not moving toward the ridge. He's moving through that creek bed. I showed you the covered approach, and in about 40 minutes, he's going to come up behind our defensive line and hit the units on the flank while they're blind and waiting for orders that will never come." Cross stared at her. "You can't know that." "I do know that," Emily said, "because it's what I would do. It's what he's done every single time. The comms blackout is his signal. He's not attacking the ridge, sir. He never was." For a long, terrible moment, Cross wavered. Every instinct he had, 22 years of instinct, told him to hold to, stick to doctrine, to keep his units in place and wait for the situation to resolve itself. That was the strong move. That was the disciplined move. That was what a real soldier did. And Emily Carter was standing in front of him, telling him that the strong move was going to get his soldiers slaughtered. "If you're wrong," Cross said slowly, "and we pull off the ridge, we hand them the high ground for nothing. We lose the exercise in the first hour." "And if I'm right," Emily said, "and we stay on the ridge, we lose the exercise and we learn nothing because we'll have done exactly what he expected." "Sir," she took a breath, "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to look at the terrain, look at the timeline, look at what we both know about how this opposing force fights, and tell me I'm wrong. If you can tell me I'm wrong, we hold the ridge. But you can't, can you?" Cross looked at the map. He looked at the creek bed. He looked at the timeline she had sketched in the margin, and he felt for the second time in a week the cold and unfamiliar sensation of being completely undeniably outmatched by a person he had dismissed as nobody. He could not tell her she was wrong, because she was right. He knew she was right. "What do you want to do?" he said. It came out quiet. It was not quite a surrender, but it was close. Something shifted in Emily's face. She had been waiting for those words, waiting to see if this proud, stubborn man could set aside his ego long enough to save his soldiers, and he had just barely and just in time. "We can't reach the units by radio," she said, moving fast now, all business. "So we do it the old way. Runners. We send messengers on foot and on vehicle to every unit in the defensive line. We don't tell them to abandon the ridge. We tell them to reposition. Here." She traced a new line on the map, a curved defensive arc that bent back from the ridge and covered the mouth of the creek bed. "We let the opposing force think we're still committed to the high ground. We let him come up that creek bed thinking he's about to hit our flank. And when he does, he's not going to hit our flank. He's going to walk straight into the strongest part of a defense he doesn't know exists." Cross studied the arc she had drawn, and slowly, despite himself, a grim smile touched his face. Because it was good. It was better than good. She was not just avoiding the trap. She was turning his trap back on him. She was letting the enemy commander's own cleverness become the thing that destroyed him. "That's a hell of a plan, Captain," he admitted. "It's only a plan if we can get the word out in time," Emily said. "And that's on your soldiers now. We need runners who know this terrain, who can move fast, and who won't get lost. Who do you trust? And here in the middle of the crisis, something happened that neither of them expected. Cross found himself turning to her, not as a rival, not as the woman who had embarrassed him, but as a partner. Reyes, he said. Reyes knows this ground better than anyone. And he's fast for a big man. And I've got a young Private Willis kid's got legs like a deer, and he's sharp. There's a corporal too, Tanner, and a soldier named Alvarez. Both of them ran cross-country before they enlisted. Then let's move, Emily said. We've got maybe 35 minutes before he commits to the creek bed. After that, it's too late to reposition anyone. What followed was this most intense half hour of the exercise, and it played out entirely on foot in silence, without a single working radio. Reyes took the northern units. Willis took the center. Tanner and Alvarez split the southern flank. And Emily and Cross stood at the command table watching the clock, watching the map moving pieces in their minds because they could not move them on the radio, betting everything on the legs and lungs of a handful of soldiers running through the dust. First runner should reach the northern element in about 4 minutes, Emily said quietly, her eyes on her watch. If Reyes makes it and they start moving, we'll know we have a chance. If he doesn't make it in time, that whole flank stays on the ridge and we've got a hole in our line the size of a battalion. Cross found that he was holding his breath. Major Daniel Cross, 22 years in the Army, was holding his breath, waiting to see if a sergeant could run fast enough to save a plan drawn up by a woman he had tried to humiliate a week ago. The irony of it was not lost on him. It sat in his chest like a stone. There, Emily breathed. In the distance through the dust, they could see movement. The northern units were shifting, repositioning, bending back into the arc. Reyes made it, that's one. One by one, over the next 20 minutes, the reports came in not by radio, but by the visible movement of units across the terrain, by runners returning breathless with confirmation. The center was moving. The southern flank was moving. The defensive arc was forming quietly and visibly right in the path of an enemy who had no idea it was coming. And at 0920, exactly when Emily had predicted, the opposing force committed to the creek bed. Cross watched it happen through his field glasses, and his mouth actually fell open. She had called it to the minute. The opposing force commander, so clever, so confident, brought his entire main effort up, that covered approach exactly as she had said he would, moving fast and quiet, certain he was about to roll up a blind and waiting flank. He had no idea that the flank had moved. He had no idea that where he expected to find a handful of confused radio-less soldiers, he was about to find the strongest, most prepared part of a defense that had been waiting specifically for him. Any second now, Emily said softly, the opposing force emerged from the mouth of the creek bed and they walked directly into the arc. It was not even close. In the language of the exercise, in the umpire's rulings, and the simulated engagements, the opposing force was cut apart. They had committed everything to a flanking maneuver that hit nothing but a wall. Their commander, so used to winning, so used to being the smartest man on the field, had been read like a book and beaten by a plan he never saw coming. Within 15 minutes, the exercise umpires were declaring the opposing force's main effort combat ineffective. The attack had failed completely. An Operation Silent Horizon, which had been minutes away from a catastrophic defeat, had turned into one of the most decisive victories in the history of the exercise. Cross lowered his field glasses. He turned and looked at Emily Carter, and for a long moment he could not find a single word. She was not celebrating. Of course she was not. She was already looking at the map, thinking about the next phase, thinking about the units that still needed to be repositioned now that the immediate threat had been neutralized. She had just orchestrated a complete reversal, had just saved the entire exercise, and she was standing there like it was another day at the office. "How did you do that?" Cross said finally. It came out almost as a whisper. Emily looked up. "Do what, sir?" "That, all of that. You called it to the minute. You knew exactly what he was going to do before he did it. You turned his own plan into the thing that destroyed him." Cross shook his head slowly. "I've been commanding soldiers for 22 years. Captain and I have never, not once, seen anything like what you just did." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, "I told you at the beginning, sir. It's not guessing. It's patterns. Everybody has patterns. Every commander, every enemy, every person, they all have habits, ways they move under pressure, decisions they make without even realizing they're making them. My whole job for a very long time has been learning how to see those patterns before the person even knows they're following them." She looked back at the map. The strong ones, the loud ones, the ones who are sure of themselves, they're actually the easiest to read because certainty makes you predictable. It's the quiet ones who watch and wait and change their minds. Those are the ones you have to be careful of. Cross heard something in that, something that was maybe about the opposing force commander and maybe just maybe about him. He did not ask which. For a long time after that, the exercise continued, but the shape of it had changed, and so had something between the two officers running it. Cross found himself deferring to her in a way that would have been unthinkable a week ago. When a report came in, he looked to her to interpret it. When a decision had to be made about repositioning units, he asked for her read before he gave the order. It was not that he had stopped being the ranking officer. It was that he had finally grudgingly begun to understand what Colonel Whitfield had been trying to tell him. That leadership was not about being the strongest person on the field. It was about recognizing who saw the thing you could not see and having the humility to listen. But the exercise was not over yet, and late in the afternoon it threw one more test at them, a test that would push the fragile new partnership between Cross and Carter to its breaking point. It came in the form of a report from the southern flank carried by a breathless runner. 2 units in the confusion of the repositioning had ended up separated from the main body, isolated in a stretch of broken ground with the remnants of the opposing force between them and the rest of the defense. In exercise terms, they were cut off. In real terms, if this had been a war, they would have been surrounded and in serious danger. "How many soldiers?" Cross demanded. "About 40, sir," the runner gasped, "split between the 2 units. They're holed up, but the opposing force knows they're there, and they're trying to close the gap around them. If they get cut off completely, they're gone." Cross's jaw tightened. 40 soldiers, isolated, and no radios to coordinate a rescue. He turned to the map, and for the first time all day, he felt the old confidence surge back, because this at least was a problem he understood. A direct problem, a problem you solved with force and speed. "We punch through," he said, already moving. "We take our reserve element. We hit the opposing force where they're trying to close the gap. We break through, and we pull those units out, fast and hard before they can complete the encirclement." "Sir, wait." Emily was studying the map, and there was tension in her voice. "There's no time to wait, Captain. Every minute we stand here, that gap gets smaller." "I know that. But if we send the reserve straight at the gap, we're doing exactly what he wants again." Emily's finger was moving across the terrain. "Look at where he's positioned. He's not trying to close the gap, sir. He's trying to bait us into it. He knows we can see those 40 soldiers are in trouble. He knows we'll want to rescue them. So he's left the gap looking closable, and he's got his real strength here on the high ground overlooking the approach, waiting for us to send our reserve charging in so he can hit us from above and take out our reserve and the trapped units both." Cross stopped. He looked at where she was pointing, and he felt the confidence drain out of him again, because once more she was right. He had been about to charge straight into another trap. The same mistake, the exact same mistake he had made all day, seeing the obvious threat and missing the real one. But this time something in him rebelled, not against her, but against himself, against the endless, humiliating pattern of being outthought at every turn. "Then what do we do, Captain?" he said, and there was frustration in it, but it was frustration aimed inward. "Because I'm not leaving 40 soldiers to get overrun. I don't care if it's an exercise. I'm not doing it. That's not who I am." And Emily Carter looked at him, then really looked at him, and something in her expression softened, because she had just heard underneath all his pride and all his bluster the thing that made Daniel Cross worth saving. He would not abandon his people. Whatever his faults, whatever his blindness, that core of him was solid, and she could work with that. "We're not going to leave them," she said, "but we're not going to charge in either. We're going to give him what he wants to see and take away what he actually needs." She began to sketch rapidly. "We send a small element toward the gap, loud, obvious, drawing his attention, making him think the rescue is coming exactly where he expects it. Meanwhile, we take our real reserve and we move it around here, through this low ground out of his sight, and we come up on his high ground position from the side he's not watching. He's so focused on the gap, so sure he knows where we're coming from, that he leaves his own flank open. Same mistake he made this morning. Same mistake he always makes. We just have to be patient enough to use it." Cross studied the plan, and slowly the frustration in his face gave way to something else. Understanding, and underneath the understanding, respect. Deep, genuine respect, the kind he had never given to anyone he did not consider his equal. You're using his own confidence against him again, Cross said. Every time, sir, Emily said. It works every time, because people like him never learn. They're so sure they're the smartest one on the field that they can't imagine being read, and that certainty is the crack you drive the whole plan through. Cross was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that surprised them both. Is that how you rid me on the training field? Last week. Is that how you knew exactly where I was going to move before I moved him? Emily hesitated. It was a dangerous question and they both knew it. But she had never been a liar and she was not going to start now. Yes, sir, she said quietly. You were certain. And certainty is loud. You told me exactly what you were going to do with every step you took long before you did it. I didn't beat you because I'm stronger than you. I'm not. I beat you because you told me everything I needed to know without saying a word. It should have wounded his pride. A week ago, it would have sent him into a rage. But standing there in the middle of the exercise, having watched this woman save his soldiers twice in a single day, Cross found that it did not wound him at all. Instead, it felt like being handed a key to a door he had spent 22 years standing in front of without ever knowing it was locked. Teach me, he said. Emily blinked. Sir, not now. Now we've got 40 soldiers to save. But after this, when Silent Horizon is over. Cross looked at her, and for the first time there was no ego in his eyes, no pride, no defensiveness, just a soldier asking to learn. Teach me how to see what you see, because I've been running around this field all day, getting outthought by a man I should have been able to beat, and the only reason we're winning is because of you. I don't want to be the guy who charges into the trap anymore, Captain. I'm too old and I've got too many people depending on me to keep being that guy. He paused. So teach me, if you're willing. And Emily Carter, who had spent years hiding, years disappearing, years trying so hard to be nobody, felt something crack open in her chest that she had kept sealed for a very long time. Because there was nothing in the world harder for a proud man to say than teach me, and Daniel Cross had just said it to her, the person he had tried to destroy. I'm willing, sir, she said softly. Now let's go get your soldiers. The rescue unfolded exactly as she had drawn it. The small element pushed toward the gap loud and obvious, and the opposing force commander, true to his nature, took the bait completely, shifting his attention and his fire toward the diversion, certain he had read the rescue perfectly. And while he was watching the gap, Cross led the real reserve through the low ground out of sight around the flank, and came up on the enemy's high ground position from the one direction the commander had left unguarded. It was over in minutes. The opposing force position was overrun. The 40 isolated soldiers were pulled out clean, and the exercise umpires who had been watching all of it began exchanging looks that said they were witnessing something they had not expected to see, a defending force that had turned every single one of the opposing commander's clever traps back against him, that had won not through strength but through patience, not through force but through vision. When the whistle finally blew ending Operation Silent Horizon, the defending force had achieved a victory so complete that the umpires would spend the next week analyzing how it had happened. And at the center of it, standing at a folding table covered in maps, were two officers who had walked into that exercise as enemies and were walking out of it as something else entirely. Cross set down his field glasses for the last time. He turned to Emily, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because there was too much to say and no easy way to say it. Captain Carter, Cross said finally. His voice was rough. I owe you an apology, a real one. Not for the exercise. For last week. For the training field. For what I did to you in front of 300 soldiers. He swallowed. I looked at you and I decided I already knew everything about you. I decided you were nobody. And I was wrong. I was so wrong that it scares me to think about all the years I've spent looking at quiet people and deciding they didn't matter. How many people like you did? I walk right past. How many did I underestimate? How many did I humiliate because they didn't look like what I thought a soldier was supposed to look like? He shook his head. I don't know, but I know it stops today. Emily looked at him for a long moment, and then she said something that Cross would carry with him for the rest of his career. Sir, she said gently, the fact that you can ask that question, the fact that you can stand here and wonder how many people you underestimated, that's the whole thing. That's the entire difference between a man who leads and a man who just gives orders. Most people never ask that question. Most people go their whole lives certain they've never been wrong about anybody. She held his gaze. You asked it. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've seen you do all week. Cross stood there, absorbing that, and felt something shift in him permanently, a door swinging open that would never close again. But even in that moment of understanding, even as the two of them stood there having finally found their way to respect, there was a question still hanging in the air unanswered. A question that Cross had promised the colonel he would stop asking, but that he could not quite let go of. Because he had watched her all day. He had watched her read minds, predict the future, orchestrate victory out of chaos. And no amount of intelligence training, no matter how good, fully explained what he had seen. There was something more. Something in the way she moved, the way she thought, the way she stayed absolutely calm when everything was falling apart. Something that came from a place he could not see. Captain Cross said carefully, "Can I ask you something? And if the answer is that you can't tell me, I'll let it go, I promise. But I have to ask." Emily went very still. She knew what was coming. She had felt it coming all day. "Where did you learn all this?" Cross asked quietly. "Not the analysis. I know they teach the analysis, but everything else. The way you fought on that field. The way you stayed calm today when the whole thing was falling apart. The way you knew without a doubt exactly how a man was going to move it before he moved." He paused. "That's not classroom training, Captain. I've been around long enough to know the difference. That's something you learn somewhere real, somewhere dangerous, somewhere they don't hand out certificates." For a long moment, Emily said nothing. She looked out over the training ground where the exercise had just ended, where 300 soldiers were gathering their gear and comparing notes on the strangest, most decisive victory any of them had ever been part of. She thought about the door she had kept closed for so many years. The parts of her file no one could read, the other life, the one she had walked away from. And she thought about the man standing in front of her, who had tried to humiliate her a week ago and had just spent an entire day learning to respect her, and who was now asking honestly and humbly to understand who she really was. "Sir," she said finally, and her voice was quieter than he had ever heard it. "There are parts of my past that I'm not allowed to talk about. You understand that? There are things in my file that even Colonel Whitfield can't read." She turned to face him. "But I'll tell you this much. There was a time in my life when I did things and went places and made decisions that most soldiers will never have to make. And I was good at it. I was very good at it. Good enough that they gave me more and more of it until one day I realized I had become someone I didn't recognize anymore. Someone who was always the most dangerous person in every room. And I got tired, sir. I got tired of being that person." Cross listened, barely breathing. "So I walked away," Emily continued. "I asked for a quiet posting, an analyst's chair, a desk and some maps, and a chance to use my mind instead of my hands. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to be nobody. I wanted to sit in a room and read patterns and never again be the one who has to end things." Her voice caught just slightly. "And for 2 years it worked. For 2 years I was just the quiet map lady. Nobody looked at me twice. Nobody asked questions. It was exactly what I wanted." She looked at Cross and there was something almost like grief in her eyes. "And then a week ago," she said softly, "a major decided he needed to prove a point in front of 300 soldiers. And just like that, the quiet was gone." Cross felt the weight of it land on him fully, then the full cost of what he had done. He had not just embarrassed a colleague. He had reached into a life that this woman had built out of pain and exhaustion and the desperate need for peace, and he had torn it open all because his pride could not stand the idea that the quiet one might not be nobody after all. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time it came from somewhere much deeper than before. "Emily, I'm sorry. I didn't know, but that's no excuse. I should have never assumed. I should have never." He stopped because there were no words big enough. "I took your peace. I see that now, and I don't know how to give it back." Emily was quiet for a moment, and then remarkably she smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile. "You can't give it back, sir," she said. "The quiet's gone. It was always going to go eventually, I think. You just happened to be the one who pulled the thread." She shrugged. "But maybe that's all right. Maybe I was hiding for too long. Maybe there's a version of this where I don't have to choose between disappearing completely and being that other person I got so tired of being. Maybe there's a middle where I can teach, where I can help soldiers like yours see the things they'd otherwise miss. Where the things I learned don't have to be a secret I'm ashamed of, but something I can actually use to keep people alive. She looked at him. You asked me to teach you. Maybe that's where it starts. Cross felt his throat tighten. I'd be honored, Captain, he said, truly. And as the two of them stood there in the fading light of the training ground, the major who had tried to humiliate her and the captain who had every reason to hate him, something new was born between them. Not friendship, not yet, it was too soon for that. But something like the beginning of it. A partnership forged in the chaos of a single impossible day, built on the ashes of pride and the hard, humbling recognition that the person you underestimate might just be the person who saves you. But even as that new understanding settled between them, neither of them knew that the story was far from over. Because word of what had happened during Operation Silent Horizon was already spreading up the chain of command. The umpires had filed their reports. Colonel Whitfield had read them. And higher up in offices and command centers far from Fort Liberty, people who had known Captain Emily Carter, in her other life people from the chapters of her record that no one at the base could read, were beginning to take notice that the woman they thought had disappeared for good had just resurfaced in the most spectacular way possible. And some of those people had reasons of their own for wanting to know exactly where Emily Carter was and exactly what she was capable of. Late that night, long after the exercise had ended and the soldiers had returned to their barracks buzzing with stories, Emily Carter sat alone in her small office again, the same desk lamp glowing, the same quiet pressing in around her. But something was different now. She did not feel hunted by the loss of her invisibility the way she had a week ago. She felt instead something she had not felt in years. She felt useful. She felt like maybe, just maybe, the things she had learned in that other life did not have to be a burden she carried in secret. Maybe they could be a gift she gave. There was a knock at her door. Come in, she said. The door opened, and it was not Reyes this time, and it was not Cross. It was Colonel Whitfield, and the expression on his face made Emily's blood run cold, because she had seen that expression before years ago in her other life, and it never meant anything good. Captain Carter, Whitfield said quietly, closing the door behind him. I need to talk to you, and I'm afraid it can't wait until morning. Emily set down her pen slowly. What is it, sir? Whitfield walked to her desk and set down a single folder. It was thin, it was unmarked, and it was sealed with a classification stamp that Emily recognized instantly, a stamp from her other life, from the parts of her record that were supposed to stay buried forever. This came down the chain about an hour ago, Whitfield said. It came directly to me, flagged for my eyes only, with instructions to deliver it to you in person and to tell no one. He looked at her, and there was worry in his old steady eyes. Emily, I don't know exactly what's in this file. I don't have the clearance to open it. But I know what that stamp means, and I know that people don't send folders with that stamp on them unless something has gone very, very wrong somewhere. He paused. Somebody from your old life is asking for you, by name. Emily stared at the folder on her desk, and the quiet office suddenly felt very cold. The piece she had spent 2 years building, the invisibility she had mourned losing during the demonstration, the new purpose she had just begun to feel during the exercise, all of it seemed very small and very fragile in the presence of that single sealed file with its terrible familiar stamp. She reached out and touched the folder, and she knew with the certainty of someone who had lived that life and understood exactly what that stamp meant, that whatever was inside was going to change everything all over again. Thank you, Colonel, she said quietly. You can go. Whitfield hesitated. Emily, whatever this is, you don't have to face it alone. This base is behind you now. After what you did today, there isn't a soldier here who wouldn't stand with you, and that includes Cross. That includes me. Emily looked up at him, and for just a moment the calm mask slipped, and Whitfield saw underneath it something he had not expected to see. Fear, real fear, not for herself, for what she knew was coming. I appreciate that, sir, she said softly. I do, but some things I have to face alone, because some things follow you home no matter how far you run. And I think this is one of them. Whitfield nodded slowly, and he left, closing the door quietly behind him. And Emily Carter sat alone in the glow of her desk lamp, one hand resting on a sealed folder from a life she thought she had left behind forever, and understood that the fight on the training field and the chaos of the exercise had only ever been the beginning. The real story, the one written in the pages she was afraid to open, was about to arrive at Fort Liberty, and it was going to test her and Cross and every soldier on that base in ways that no demonstration and no field exercise ever could. Slowly, with a hand that did not quite hold steady, she broke the seal on the folder and began to read. The pages inside that folder were not many, but they were enough to steal the breath from Emily Carter's chest. She read the first line and her hand tightened on the paper. She read the second and her jaw went rigid. And by the time she reached the name at the bottom of the first page, a name she had prayed she would never see again, she understood that the quiet life she had mourned losing was not just over. It had never really existed. It had been borrowed time, all of it, and now the bill had come due. The name was Victor Sorensen. For a long moment, Emily did not move. She sat perfectly still in the glow of her desk lamp, staring at that name, feeling the years peel away like layers of paint, until she was standing again in a place she had spent a very long time trying to forget. Victor Sorensen, a man she had helped bring down years ago in the other life, the life that no one at Fort Liberty was cleared to know about. A man who had sworn in the last words she ever heard him speak that no matter how deep she buried herself, no matter how far she ran, he would find her. And now, according to the pages in front of her, Victor Sorensen was no longer where he was supposed to be. He had been someplace secure, someplace that was never supposed to fail. And it had failed, and he was gone. And the very first thing he had done upon getting free was ask for her by name. Emily set the folder down with a hand that would not stay steady. She had spent 2 years reading maps and telling herself she had earned her peace. She had spent 1 week rediscovering that the things she used to be were still inside her. And now, in a single hour, the past she thought she had buried had reached up out of the ground and wrapped its fingers around her throat. She did not sleep that night. She sat at her desk until the sky outside her window began to lighten, turning the pages over and over, memorizing every detail, planning, calculating, doing the things she had always done when the world went dark, which was to think her way toward the light. And by the time the base began to stir with the sounds of morning, Emily Carter had made a decision. She was not going to run. She was done running. If Victor Sorensen was coming, then she was going to meet him with her eyes open and her mind ready the way she had met every threat in her old life. But she was not going to do it by disappearing. She had tried that. It had not worked. This time she was going to do it differently. This time she was not going to be alone. At 0700, she walked into Colonel Whitfield's office without an appointment, and the old colonel took one look at her face and dismissed everyone else in the room. "You read it," Whitfield said quietly once the door was closed. "I read it," Emily confirmed. She set the folder on his desk. "Sir, I can't tell you everything in here, you know that. But I can tell you this much, and I need you to trust me on it, because lives may depend on it." She leaned forward. "There's a man. His name doesn't matter to you because you've never heard it and you're not cleared to. But I helped to put him away a long time ago in my old life. He was dangerous then. He's more dangerous now. And he has escaped from a place he was never supposed to escape from, and the first thing he did was ask for me." Whitfield's face did not change, but Emily saw the tension gather at the corners of his eyes. "Ask for you how?" "What does that mean? Ask for you." "It means he wants me," Emily said. "It means this is personal. It means that of all the people he could be thinking about right now, of all the enemies he made in his life, I'm the one he came looking for first." She held Whitfield's gaze. "And it means that he knows where I am, or he's going to know very soon, which means that whatever he's planning, it's going to come here, to this base, to these soldiers, because I'm here." The silence in the office was heavy enough to press down on both of them. "You're telling me," Whitfield said slowly, "that this base, my base 3,000 soldiers, is now a target because of your past." "I'm telling you that it might be," Emily said, "and I'm telling you that I'm not going to let it happen. But I can't stop it alone. Not this time. I tried to handle everything alone in my old life, sir, and I'm tired, and this is bigger than one person." She took a breath, and it cost her something to say the next words, because they went against every instinct she had spent years building. "I need help. I need you, and I need Cross." Whitfield studied her for a long moment. "Cross," he repeated. "The man who tried to humiliate you 2 weeks ago. The same man who spent all of yesterday learning to trust me," Emily said. "The same man who asked me to teach him." Sir, I've spent a lot of years learning to read people, and I'm telling you, whatever Daniel Cross was 2 weeks ago, he's not that man anymore. Something changed in him during that exercise. And if this thing comes the way I think it's going to come, I'm going to need a soldier beside me who's brave and stubborn and who won't quit. And whatever his faults, crosses all three. Whitfield leaned back in his chair, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly he reached for his phone. "Get me Major Cross," he said into it. "My office, now." Cross arrived within minutes, and the moment he stepped through the door and saw Emily's face, the last traces of the swagger he used to carry drained right out of him. He had learned in the space of a single field exercise to read her at least a little, and what he read in her expression now frightened him more than any enemy ever had. "What's wrong?" he said. It was not a greeting. It was a demand born of real concern. "Sit down, Daniel," Whitfield said. "Captain Carter has something to tell you. And when she's done, the three of us are going to have to make some very hard decisions very quickly." Cross sat, and Emily told him. She told him as much as she was allowed to tell him, which was not everything but was enough. She told him about the other life, about the man, about the escape, about the fact that the danger was coming and that it was coming because of her, and that the base and everyone on it might be caught in the middle of a war that had started years ago in a place none of them would ever be permitted to know about. And Cross, to his enormous credit, did not flinch. He did not accuse her. He did not blame her for bringing danger to his base. He listened, his face growing harder and more focused with every word. And when she was finished, the first thing he said was not about himself, and it was not about the risk. It was about the people. "How do we protect the soldiers?" he said. Emily felt something warm and unexpected move through her chest, because that was the question. That was the right question. That was the question that told her she had been right about Daniel Cross, that the man who had tried to break her on the training field had genuinely become someone she could stand beside. "That's exactly the right thing to ask, sir," she said quietly, "and it's why I asked for you specifically." Over the next hour, the three of them built the beginning of a plan. It was not a complete plan because they did not yet know how the threat would come, or when, or in what form. But Emily knew the man they were facing, knew his patterns, the way she knew the pattern of any enemy, and she began to sketch out the shape of what to expect. He would not come loud, she told them. He was not the type to announce himself. He would come quiet and clever, and he would try to use the base's own size and confusion against it. He would look for the gap, the blind spot, the place where everyone assumed they were safe. "He's like the opposing force commander from the exercise," Cross said, slowly understanding. "He wants us looking one way while he comes from another." "Exactly like that," Emily said. "Except this one's real, and this one doesn't stop when the whistle blows." They agreed to keep the circle small. The fewer people who knew the fewer people could accidentally give something away, and the harder it would be for Sorensen to learn what defenses were being prepared. Whitfield would quietly tighten base security under the cover of a routine readiness drill. Cross would position trusted soldiers at the key points Emily identified without telling them why. And Emily herself would do the thing she was best at, the thing that no one else on that base could do, which was to think like the enemy, to get inside his head, to read his moves before he made them. But even as they planned, Emily carried a secret weight that she did not share, not even with Whitfield, not even with Cross. Because the folder had contained one more piece of information buried in the last page that she had not told them. It was the reason Sorensen had escaped, and it was not luck, and it was not a failure of security. Someone had helped him, someone on the inside, someone with access and clearance and a reason to want Victor Sorensen free and hunting for Emily Carter. Which meant that somewhere possibly close, possibly even at Fort Liberty itself, there was a person Emily could not identify, working against her, feeding information to the man who wanted her dead. She did not tell Cross and Whitfield about the inside help, and she hated herself a little for the silence. But she had learned long ago that some truths spoken too early cause more danger than they prevent. If there was a traitor in the circle, the last thing she wanted was to let them know that she knew. So she kept it to herself, and she watched, and she waited, and she trusted no one completely, not even the two men who were now risking everything to stand beside her. The days that followed were the tensest of Emily Carter's life at Fort Liberty. On the surface, everything looked normal. The soldiers trained, the base ran its routines. The readiness drill Whitfield had ordered gave cover for the quiet tightening of security. And to anyone watching, Captain Emily Carter was still just the quiet map lady back at her screens reading her patterns. But underneath, she was fighting a war that no one could see. She spent every waking hour thinking like Sorensen, walking the base in her mind, through his eyes, asking herself where she would strike if she were him, how she would get in, what she would use, who she would turn. And she watched the people around her, all of them, looking for the small, the tiny inconsistency, the crack in someone's behavior that would reveal the traitor she knew was out there. And it was during those days, in the middle of all that hidden tension, that something happened between her and Cross that neither of them expected. He came to her office one evening late after the base had gone quiet, and he knocked and waited to be invited in the way he had learned to do. And when he sat down across from her, he did not talk about the threat or the plan or Sorensen. He talked about something else entirely. "I've been thinking about that day," he said quietly, "the training field, the demonstration, and I keep coming back to one thing I can't get past." He looked at her. "You knew. When I called you out there, when I ordered Reyes to fight you, when I challenged you myself, you knew the whole time that you could beat all of us without breaking a sweat. And you asked me to reconsider. Twice you tried to protect me from my own stupidity, and I wouldn't let you." He shook his head. Why would you try to protect a man who was doing everything he could to humiliate you? I don't understand it. I don't think I'd have done it in your place." Emily was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Because I've watched a lot of proud men destroy themselves, Daniel, in my old life. Men who were certain right up until the moment they weren't. And I learned that the kindest thing you can do for a proud man sometimes is to try to stop him before he falls too far. Not because he deserves it, but because everybody deserves the chance to not be their worst self." She looked at him. "You were being your worst self that day, and I didn't want you to have to live with it, that's all." Cross absorbed that, and something moved behind his eyes, some old wound she could not see. "My father was a proud man," he said finally, and it clearly cost him to say it. "Career soldier, old school. He measured everything in strength, just like I do. Just like I did." He corrected himself, and the correction seemed to matter to him. And he fell, Emily. He fell hard at the end of his career because he was too proud to listen to anyone, too proud to admit he was wrong, too proud to change. And I watched it happen. I watched it break him, and I swore I'd never be like him. His voice grew rough. "And then 2 weeks ago, I stood on a training field and became him. Exactly him. And you were the one who tried to catch me." He looked up and his eyes were bright. "I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't think there's a way." Emily felt her own throat tighten, because in that moment she understood Daniel Cross in a way she never had before. He was not a bully at his core. He was a frightened son running from the ghost of a father who had fallen so terrified of becoming that man that he had become him anyway. And she saw with sudden clarity that the thing that made him hard, the thing that made him cruel that day on the field was not strength at all. It was fear, the oldest fear there is, the fear of turning into the thing you hate. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "Just don't go back to being him. That is all I want. Whatever happens with Sorensen, whatever happens after, just don't become your father. You're better than that. I've seen it now. You're so much better than that." And Daniel Cross Harden, battlefield commander, 22 years in the Army, sat in a small office late at night and had to look away because his eyes had filled and he did not want her to see. It was in that moment, that quiet human moment between two people who had started as enemies, that Emily's instincts, sharpened by years in her other life, picked up something wrong. It was small. It was almost nothing. But her office phone sitting on the desk between them had a light on it that should not have been on. A faint glow indicating an active line, an open connection, as if someone somewhere had quietly patched into her office and was listening to every word. Emily did not react. That was the training. That was the old life. She did not so much as glance at the light directly. Instead, she kept talking to Cross in the same soft tone while her mind raced at 100 miles an hour because the implication was staggering. Someone was listening. Someone had the access to tap her office line without leaving a trace. Someone with clearance. Someone on the inside. The traitor. The person who had helped Sorensen escape. They were not just out there somewhere. They were here. close enough to reach her phone. And they had just heard her and Cross talking. Not about the plan, thank God they had not discussed the plan tonight. But they had been listening, which meant they had probably been listening before, which meant every conversation Emily had held in this office, every quiet word might have been carried straight to the enemy. Daniel, Emily said, and she kept her voice perfectly level, perfectly casual, betraying nothing. It's getting late. I think we've talked enough for one night. Why don't you head back and we'll pick this up tomorrow? Somewhere with better coffee than my office. Cross, who did not have her training, almost missed it. But something in the precise flatness of her tone reached him some echo of the calm she had shown on the training field right before she put him in the dirt, and he understood, without knowing why, that she was telling him something underneath the words. He rose. Sure, Captain, he said, matching her casualness as best he could. Tomorrow. Better coffee. And as he moved toward the door, Emily scribbled something fast on a scrap of paper and pressed it into his hand, and cross-palmed it without looking, and walked out into the night. Outside around the corner, out of sight of her office, he opened the paper. 4 words in her quick, precise handwriting. My office is bugged. Cross felt his blood turn to ice. He crumpled the note and his mind reeled with the implications. Someone had bugged the office of the officer they were all trying to protect. Someone inside the wire. Someone with access. And Emily had known or suspected and had said nothing until this moment, which meant she had been carrying this alone, watching everyone, trusting no one, even him. Especially him, maybe because he was the newest to her circle and the one with the least reason on paper to have earned her trust. But she had trusted him with the note. That meant something. That meant whatever her fears, she had decided he was not the traitor. He had to find out who was. The next morning, Emily and Cross met not in her office, but out on the training ground, walking slowly across the open field, where no bug could reach them and no eavesdropper could hide. And there under the wide sky, they spoke freely for the first time. How long have you known? Cross asked. I suspected from the first night I read the file, Emily said. The escape wasn't clean luck, Daniel. It was helped. Somebody on the inside opened the door, and last night I confirmed that whoever it is has reach here, on this base, close enough to tap my line. She looked at him. I didn't tell you before because I didn't know who I could trust. I'm sorry, but in my old life, a leak was the most dangerous thing there was. It's an instinct I can't turn off. Don't apologize, Cross said. You were right to be careful. Hell, you were right not to trust me. 2 weeks ago, I'd have been the last person on this base you should have trusted. He was quiet for a moment. So what do we do? Somebody's listening. Somebody helped this man escape and pointed him at you. And they're here walking around this base, probably smiling at us in the hallways. We do what I do best, Emily said. We turn it around on them. Right now, they think they have the advantage. They think they're listening and we don't know. That's their strength. That's their certainty. A cold, familiar focus settled over her face. And certainty, Daniel, is the crack you drive the whole plan through. If they're listening to my office, then we're going to give them something to hear. We're going to feed them exactly what we want them to believe. And while they're busy acting on false information, we're going to be moving in the dark where they can't see us at all. Cross stared at her in slow understanding, and something like awe spread across his face. You're going to use the bug against them. I'm going to use everything against them, Emily said quietly. The bug, their confidence, their assumption that I'm still hiding, still scared, still just the quiet map lady who got lucky on a training field. Her jaw tightened. They have no idea who they're dealing with. And I intend to keep it that way right up until the moment it's too late for them to do anything about it. Over the following days, a deadly invisible game unfolded across Fort Liberty. Emily in her bugged office held careful conversations designed to be overheard, feeding the listener a version of events that was almost true but wrong in the ways that mattered. She spoke when she knew she was being heard about defenses being concentrated at one part of the base, about her own fear and uncertainty, about a plan to move herself off base to a supposedly secure location on a specific day. All of it false, all of it bait. And meanwhile, away from the office, out in the open or in Cross's quarters, or on long walks across the training ground, she and Cross built the real plan. And Whitfield, once he was brought fully into the truth, lent them every quiet resource he could without tipping their hand. But the strain of it wore on all of them, because they were fighting an enemy they could not see guarding against this man who had not yet shown himself, hunting a traitor whose face they did not know. Every soldier who passed in the hallway might be the leak. Every friendly word might hide a knife. And the not knowing, the constant vigilance, the impossibility of trusting anyone completely ground away at them day after day. It was Cross who nearly broke first. He came to Emily one night out on their walking ground, and his frustration boiled over. "I can't do this," he said. "I can't keep looking at my own soldiers and wondering which one of them wants you dead. These are my people, Emily. I've bled with some of these men, and now I'm supposed to suspect all of them." He shook his head hard. "How do you live like this? How did you live like this in your old life, all those years, trusting nobody, watching everybody? It's poison. It gets into you." And Emily, who understood that poison better than anyone alive, stopped walking and turned to face him. "You want to know the truth, Daniel?" she said quietly. "You don't live like this. You survive like this. There's a difference. And it's exactly why I walked away. It's exactly why I wanted to be nobody." Her voice softened. "I didn't come to Fort Liberty because I loved reading maps. I came here because I was dying inside from years of doing exactly what you're doing right now. Trusting nobody, watching everybody, being alone in a crowd." She looked at him. "So when I tell you that this is temporary, that we are going to end this, that you are going to get your base and your trust and your peace back, I need you to believe me. Because I know what it costs to live in this poison too long. And I will not let it get into you the way it got into me." Cross looked at her, and the frustration drained out of him, replaced by something quieter. "You really do understand," he said. "Everything you're asking me to carry right now, you carried for years." "For years," Emily agreed softly. "And I don't wish it on anyone, least of all you." They stood there in silence for a moment, two soldiers bound together by a danger neither of them had chosen, and something passed between them that was deeper than respect, now deeper than partnership. It was the understanding that only exists between people who have seen the same darkness. And then on the 12th day, everything changed. It was Reyes who brought it to them, and the fact that it was Reyes mattered enormously because Emily had come to trust the big sergeant more than almost anyone. He found them on the training ground at dawn, and his face was grim. "Captain, Major," he kept his voice low, "I found something, and I don't like it." "What is it, Sergeant?" Emily said. "You had me watching in the comms room quietly like you asked, watching who came and went, who had access to the systems." Reyes swallowed. "Ma'am, there's a warrant officer. Name's Pratt, communications specialist. Been on this base 8 months. And 3 nights ago, I watched him access a system he had no business accessing at an hour when nobody should have been in there. I didn't say anything. I just watched like you told me. And I kept watching." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook. "Last night he did it again. And this time I got close enough to see his screen. Ma'am, he was into the base phone system. He was into the routing. He was into your office line." The world went very still around Emily Carter. Pratt, a warrant officer, a communications specialist, someone with exactly the access needed to tap her office. Someone who had arrived on the base 8 months ago, long before the demonstration, long before Sorensen's escape. Which meant this had been planned for a very long time. Which meant Sorensen or whoever was behind him had placed a man at Fort Liberty months in advance, waiting, watching, preparing for the day Emily Carter's past would come to collect her. "You're sure?" Emily said quietly. "Reyes, you have to be sure. Because if you're right, this is the thread that unravels everything. And if you're wrong, we destroy an innocent man." "I'm sure, ma'am," Reyes said. "I saw his screen. I saw your line. There's no other reason for a comms officer to be routing traffic off your personal office phone in the middle of the night." He looked at her steadily. "It's him. I'd stake my career on it. I'd stake more than that." Emily closed her eyes for a moment. Pratt, she finally had a name. She finally had a face for the invisible enemy who had been listening to her, feeding information to the man who wanted her dead. And with that name came a terrible clarity, because now she understood the shape of the whole thing. Now she could see the pattern. "Don't touch him," she said, opening her eyes. "Nobody touch him. Nobody so much as looks at him differently. Do you understand me, both of you?" She looked from Reyes to Cross. "Right now, Pratt thinks he's invisible. He thinks he's winning. And as long as he thinks that he's useful to us, the moment he knows we're on to him, He goes to ground, or worse, he warns Sorensen that his inside man is blown, and then we lose our only window into what they're planning. Her mind was moving fast now, faster than it had in years, all the old machinery coming back online. We don't arrest Pratt, we use Pratt. He's been feeding them information. Now he's going to feed them exactly what we want them to know. He just won't realize he's doing it. Cross stared at her. You want to turn the traitor into your own tool without him even knowing it. I want to do to him exactly what he's been doing to us, Emily said. He thinks he's controlling the flow of information. Now I'm going to continue to control what flows to him and through him to Sorensen. A cold, focused calm had settled over her, the calm of a person stepping fully back into the person she used to be. For 12 days, I've been fighting blind, not knowing who the leak was. Now I know, and knowing changes everything, because now I don't have to guess where the information goes. I know exactly where it goes, and that means I can put anything I want into Victor Sorensen's head, and he'll believe it because he thinks it's coming from his own man. Reyes and Cross looked at each other and then back at her, and both of them felt the same thing at once, a mix of awe and a small, cold shiver at the ruthlessness underneath her calm. This was the woman from the file no one could read. This was who Emily Carter really was underneath the quiet map lady, underneath the peace she had tried so hard to build. Not cruel, never cruel, but absolutely coldly capable in a way that made you deeply glad she was on your side. There's just one problem, Emily said, and for the first time a shadow of worry crossed her face. If Pratt's been here 8 months, then Sorensen has been planning this for at least that long. Which means whatever he's coming to do, it's not going to be simple, and it's not going to be small. A man doesn't place an agent on a military base a year in advance for a quick hit. She looked at both of them. He's not just coming for me, he's coming for something bigger, and I need to find out what it is before it's too late. That night, Emily went back into her bugged office and she played her part perfectly, holding a false conversation with Whitfield about her supposed transfer off base feeding Pratt, and through him, Sorensen exactly the picture she wanted them to have. And when she left the office and walked out into the dark, she felt for the first time in 12 days that she was no longer the one being hunted. She was hunting now. But the folder had held one final secret, one she had not shared with anyone, one she had barely allowed herself to think about. Because in the last line of the last page in a note written by whoever had sent the file, there had been a warning. And the warning had said that Victor Sorensen's obsession with Emily Carter was not as everyone assumed about revenge for the operation that had put him away. It was about something Emily had taken from him, something she did not remember taking, something she did not even know she had. And as Emily Carter walked across the darkened base that night, one hand unconsciously touching the place over her heart, where old scars from an old life still ached, she realized that the most dangerous part of this whole terrible situation was not the escaped enemy, and not the traitor in the comms room, and not the attack she knew was coming. The most dangerous part was that Victor Sorensen knew something about her past that she herself did not know. And he was coming all this way, risking everything to make sure she learned it in the worst way possible. She stopped walking. She stood alone in the dark, and she stared up at the sky, and she felt the cold certainty settle into her bones that the reckoning coming to Fort Liberty was going to be about far more than a demonstration on a training field, far more than pride, far more than one man's need to prove he was strong. It was going to reach all the way back into the buried chapters of her own life, into the parts of her own story that even she was not allowed to remember. And somewhere out there in the dark, getting closer with every passing hour, Victor Sorensen was coming to open a door inside Emily Carter that she had spent her entire life keeping shut. The thing about a door you have kept shut your whole life is that you never know what is behind it until someone forces it open, and Emily Carter spent the next 3 days trying not to think about what Victor Sorensen might be bringing to pry hers loose. She could not afford to be distracted. Whatever he knew about her past, whatever things she had supposedly taken from him without remembering it, would have to wait because the immediate danger was concrete and close and getting closer. Pratt was still in the comms room, still feeding false information up the line, still believing he was invisible. And Emily was using him now the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, precisely carefully feeding Sorensen a picture of a base with its guard concentrated in the wrong place of a target who was frightened and planning to run of a window of opportunity that was in fact a trap. But something was wrong. Emily could feel it. She had spent too many years reading the rhythm of these things not to notice when the rhythm changed. And on the fourth day, the rhythm changed. Pratt stopped transmitting. Reyes brought her the news at dawn on the training ground, where they now held all their real conversations. He hasn't touched the systems in 18 hours, ma'am. No access to your line, no routing, nothing. It's like he just stopped. The big sergeant's face was troubled. That's not normal, is it? After all this, for him to just go quiet. Emily felt the cold prickle of alarm crawl up the back of her neck. No, she said quietly. It's not normal. It's the opposite of normal. Her mind was already racing through the possibilities, and none of them were good. Either he knows we're on to him, which means someone tipped him, which means we have a second leak we don't know about. Or, she paused, and the second possibility was worse. Or he's gone quiet because he doesn't need to transmit anymore. Because he already sent everything he needed to send. Because the plan is already in motion and there's nothing left to report. Cross, who had joined them, went pale. You're saying it's already started. I'm saying it might be, Emily said. I'm saying that a man who goes silent right before the end isn't hiding. He's waiting. He's in position. She turned to Reyes. I need to know where Pratt is. Right now. Not arrested, not confronted, just found. I need eyes on him. Reyes was already moving. On it, ma'am. But even as he ran, Emily felt the whole careful structure she had built starting to shift beneath her, and she understood with sudden, sickening clarity that she had made an error. Not a large one. But in this game, no error was small. She had been so focused on controlling the flow of information through Pratt, so confident in her ability to feed the enemy a false picture, that she had committed the exact sin she had spent her whole life warning others against. She had grown certain. And certainty, as she herself had said again and again, was the crack you drove the whole plan through. Sorensen had let her play her game. He had let Pratt feed her false information right back, information she had trusted, because she believed she was the one in control. And now in the silence, she realized she had no idea how much of what she thought she knew was real. Daniel, she said, and her voice was tight, I need you to listen to me very carefully, because I think I've made a mistake, and we may have very little time. She looked at him. For the last 2 weeks, I've been operating on the assumption that I was reading Sorensen, that I understood his patterns, that I could predict him, that I was the smart one in this fight. And I think I was wrong. I think he's been letting me believe that. I think he knows me better than I know him. Cross frowned. How could he know you better than you know him? You said you barely remember the man. That's exactly the problem, Emily said, and her voice cracked just slightly. I barely remember him, but he remembers me. He spent years, maybe decades, thinking about me, studying me, learning every pattern I have. While I forgot him, he memorized me. That's the asymmetry, Daniel. That's the thing I missed. I've been trying to read a man who already had me memorized before this even started. The words hung in the air between them, and both of them understood the danger of them. Emily Carter's entire strength, the thing that made her extraordinary, was her ability to read the enemy. And she had just realized that in this one case against this one man, she might be the one being read. Reyes came back within the hour, and his report confirmed the worst. Pratt's gone, ma'am, cleared out of his quarters. His vehicle's gone from the lot. Gate records show he left the base last night on legitimate paperwork, a family emergency he'd filed for in advance. He shook his head. It was all set up. He didn't run. He was extracted. On schedule. Like it was always the plan for him to be gone by now. Emily closed her eyes, of course. Of course it had been planned. Pratt had never been meant to stay until the end. He had done his job, planted the bug, fed the false picture, and then left cleanly on paperwork filed weeks in advance before anyone could catch him. Which meant the operation was entering its final phase. Which meant Sorensen was done gathering information. Which meant he was coming. How long? Cross asked quietly. How long do we have? I don't know, Emily admitted, and it cost her to say it because not knowing was the thing she feared most. But if Pratt was pulled out last night, then whatever's coming is coming soon. Days, maybe less. She opened her eyes and something hardened in them, a decision being made. We can't wait for him to come to us anymore. We've lost the initiative. If we sit here and wait, we're doing exactly what he wants, letting him pick the time and the place. I won't do that. I've made that mistake once already in this fight. I'm not making it twice. So what do? Cross said. We changed the game, Emily said. He thinks he's got a scared target sitting on a base waiting to run. So we stop being that. We stop reacting. We do the thing he won't expect because it's the thing the frightened target he thinks I am would never do. She looked at Cross and Reyes, and the resolve in her face was absolute. We go on offense. We stop guarding and start hunting. If he's coming here, then somewhere out there close, there's a staging point, a place he's operating from. People are helping him. Supplies are moving. A man doesn't launch an operation against a military base out of thin air. There's a footprint, and I know how to find footprints. And so began the hunt in reverse. For days, Emily had been the hunted. Now with Whitfield's quiet backing and a small circle of soldiers she had come to trust, she turned herself back into the hunter she had been in her old life. She pulled every thread. She read every pattern. She thought like Sorensen, put herself inside his planning, asked where she would stage an operation like this, what she would need, how she would move it. And slowly, painstakingly, over 3 exhausting days, she began to build a picture. There was a property, an old commercial building, 20 miles from the base, leased 8 months ago, right around the time Pratt had first arrived at Fort Liberty by a shell company that dissolved into nothing when Emily traced it back. Vehicles had been coming and going, deliveries had been made at odd hours, and the whole thing sat in a location that made no commercial sense whatsoever, but made perfect tactical sense if what you were planning was an operation against the base 20 miles down the road. That's it, Emily said, staring at the picture she had assembled. That's his staging point. That's where he's been building whatever he's building. She looked up at Cross and Whitfield, and here's the part that matters. He doesn't know I've found it. As far as Sorensen knows, I'm still the scared map lady sitting on the base waiting to run. He thinks he has the element of surprise. He thinks he's about to come at me from the dark. A cold, focused light came into her eyes. But I'm about to come at him from the dark first. It was a dangerous plan, and Whitfield said so. Emily, if you're right, that building is full of trained armed men who have spent months preparing to attack a military installation. You can't just walk in there. This isn't the training field. This is real. People die. I know exactly how real it is, sir, Emily said quietly, and something in her voice reminded them all that she had lived in this reality for years long before any of them. I'm not proposing that we walk in. I'm proposing that we don't give him the fight he's prepared for. He's built an operation designed to hit a base by surprise. So we take away the surprise, and we take away the base as the battleground. We don't let him bring the fight to 3,000 soldiers and their families. We end it before it ever reaches the gate. She looked at Whitfield steadily. Sir, if we wait, and he comes here, people on this base die. Soldiers, maybe civilians, maybe families. If we move first, we control the terms. It's not safe. Nothing about this is safe. But it's safer than the alternative, and it keeps the killing away from home. Whitfield was quiet for a long moment, weighing it the terrible weight of a commander deciding where the danger would fall. And finally he nodded slowly. I'll get you the right people, he said. Not a mob, a small, quiet, capable element. And it goes through the proper channels, Emily, all of it, because if we do this wrong, it doesn't matter if we're right, it'll be a disaster. He looked at her hard. But I trust you. God help me, after everything I've seen from you, I trust you. So tell me what you need. What happened over the next 36 hours, Emily could only ever describe afterward, in the barest outline because the details belonged to the world she had left and did not fully belong in the telling. A small element was assembled carefully, quietly, with the right clearances and the right people. The staging building was watched. Patterns were established. And Emily Carter, who had spent 2 years reading maps and telling herself she would never again be the most dangerous person in a room, put on a version of the person she used to be one last time because the people she now cared about were in danger and there was no one else who could do what she could do. But the night before they were to move, something happened that changed everything. And it happened because of Daniel Cross. He came to her late and he did not talk about the plan. He sat down across from her and he said, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it, but you need to hear it before tomorrow. Emily looked at him. What is it, Daniel? You're going in there tomorrow to hunt a man who wants you dead, Cross said. And you're doing it partly because it's the right tactical call keeping the fighting away from the base. I understand that. But that's not the only reason, is it? He leaned forward. There's a part of you that wants to face him, Because of the thing in the file. The thing he knows about your past that you don't. You want to look him in the eye and make him tell you what it is. He held her gaze. And that Emily is the one thing that could get you killed. Because he knows it. He's counting on it. He wants you to come, and a person who wants the truth badly enough will walk right into a trap to get it. The words landed like a physical blow because they were true, and Emily had not admitted them even to herself. She had told herself this was tactics. She had told herself this was about protecting the base, and it was. But underneath in the place she did not look, there was a desperate, hungry need to know. To finally understand what she had done, what she had taken, why this man had spent so much of his life obsessed with her. And Cross had seen it. This man who 2 weeks ago could not read a battlefield to save his life had learned to read her well enough to see the one dangerous truth she had hidden even from herself. "You're right," she said finally, and her voice was very quiet. "I do want to know. I've spent my whole life with pieces of my own past locked away in files I'm not allowed to read. And now there's a man who knows something about me that I don't, something important enough that he'd risk everything to come tell me. And yes, part of me wants to walk in there and make him say it." She looked at Cross, and for the first time he saw real vulnerability in her, the frightened person underneath all the deadly competence. "You have no idea what it's like, Daniel, to not know your own story, to have parts of yourself that are classified even to you." "Then don't go," Cross said. "Let the element go without you. You've built the plan, you've found the target. Let trained people execute it, and you stay here safe where he can't use your own need against you." But Emily was already shaking her head. "I can't, and you know I can't. Nobody else can read this the way I can. Nobody else knows him. If it goes wrong in there, and it might, they'll need someone who can adapt, someone who can think like him. That's me. That's only me." She reached out and, in a gesture that surprised them both, put her hand over his. "But I hear you, I do, and I promise you this. I'm going in with my eyes open now. You've made sure of that. You've taken away the one blind spot that could have killed me. Whatever he offers me in there, whatever truth he dangles, I'll know it's bait. Because you reminded me." She squeezed his hand. "You may have just saved my life, Daniel, by seeing the thing I couldn't see in myself." Cross looked down at her hand on his and back up at her face, and something passed between them that neither of them named because there was no time to name it, and because naming it would have made the danger of tomorrow unbearable. "Just come back," he said roughly. "Whatever's in that building, whatever he tells you, just come back." "I'll come back," Emily said softly. "I've got a major to finish training. I'm not done with you yet." The next morning, the operation went in. Emily would carry the memory of it for the rest of her life, though she would speak of it to almost no one. The staging building. The men Sorensen had gathered. The confirmation that everything she had feared was real, that this had been an operation aimed at Fort Liberty, at her months in the making. It did not go perfectly. Nothing real ever does. There was a moment near the end when it all nearly came apart, when the men inside realized they were under threat and the whole thing tipped toward chaos. And it was in that chaos that Emily's true worth showed itself, not as a fighter, though she was that, but as a mind that stayed calm and clear when everything around her fell into disorder. She read the panic. She predicted the movements. She kept the small element together and moving and alive when a lesser leader would have lost them all. And then in a back room of that building at the very end of it, she came face to face with Victor Sorensen. He was older than she remembered, thinner, worn down by the years, but his eyes were exactly as she remembered them, and they lit up when he saw her with a terrible patient satisfaction, the look of a man who had waited a very long time for exactly this moment. "Emily Carter," he said softly, "I knew you would come. I knew that if I reached out my hand, you would not be able to stop yourself from taking it." He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "You never could resist a mystery, especially a mystery about yourself." Emily kept her weapon level and her voice calm, though her heart was pounding. "It's over, Victor," she said. "Your building, your men, your operation, all of it. It's finished." "Perhaps," Sorensen said unbothered, "but you're here in front of me, which means in the only way that matters I've already won." He tilted his head. "You want to know, don't you? The thing, the reason, why I came all this way, what you took from me. It's been eating at you since you read that file. I can see it in your face. You need to know." And here is where Daniel Cross's warning saved Emily Carter's life, or at least her soul, because every fiber of her being screamed to ask, to demand the truth, to finally learn the thing that had been hidden from her. But she remembered. She remembered Cross sitting across from her, telling her that her own need to know was the trap that a person who wants the truth badly enough will walk right into anything to get it. So instead of asking Emily did the hardest thing she had ever done, she smiled, and she said, "You know what, Victor, I don't need to know." For the first time, something flickered across Sorensen's face. Surprise. And under it, the beginning of fear, because his entire plan, his entire hold over her, had been built on the certainty that she would need the truth so badly, she would give him whatever power that need created. "You're lying," he said. "You've spent your whole life not knowing your own story. And I'm the only one who can tell you. You can't just walk away from that." "I can," Emily said quietly. And as she said it, she realized it was true. And the realization set something free inside her that she had not known was chained. "For years, I thought I needed to know every piece of my own past to be whole. I thought the classified parts, the locked doors, the things they took from me, I thought I couldn't be a complete person without them." She looked at him steadily. "But you know what I've learned in the last 2 weeks? Victor, standing on a training field, running a field exercise, protecting a base full of people who trust me, I've learned that I already know who I am. I don't need a file to tell me. I don't need you to tell me. I know who I am because of what I do and how I treat people and what I'm willing to risk to keep others safe." She shook her head slowly. "You came all this way to give me a piece of my past, but I don't need it. And that means you've got nothing. You've got nothing over me at all." And Emily watched the whole thing collapse in Victor Sorensen's eyes. The years of planning, the certainty, the one weapon he thought he had against her, her own hunger to know herself, dissolved into nothing because she had refused to pick it up. He had built his entire war on a version of Emily Carter who no longer existed. The frightened, fragmented woman searching for her own story. And that woman was gone. In her place was someone whole, someone who had found her identity, not in the buried past, but in the present, in the people she protected, in the person she had chosen to become. "It doesn't matter," Sorensen said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "You'll wonder. For the rest of your life, you'll wonder what I would have told you." "Maybe," Emily said, "but I'll wonder as a free woman, not as your prisoner. And that's the difference. You never understood Victor. You thought the truth would give you power over me, but the truth only has power over people who are afraid of it. And I'm not afraid anymore." It ended there in that back room, not with violence, though violence had brought them to that point, but with a quiet refusal that took everything from a man who had built his life around Emily Carter's need. Sorensen was taken. The operation was over. And the threat that had hung over Fort Liberty for weeks, the invisible danger that had turned every hallway into a place of suspicion, was finally completely gone. Emily walked out of that building into the light, and Cross was there waiting, his face tight with worry that dissolved into relief the moment he saw her. "You came back," he said. "I came back," Emily confirmed, and then because she could see the question he was too polite to ask, she added, "And no, I didn't let him tell me. Whatever he knew about my past, it's going with him. I don't need it." She looked at Cross, and there was something lighter in her face than he had ever seen, something almost like peace. "You were right, Daniel. My need to know was the trap, and you saved me from it, not by fighting, by seeing me clearly enough to warn me." She smiled. "You've come a long way from the man who thought strength was about muscle." Cross let out a breath that seemed to carry weeks of tension with it. "I had a good teacher," he said quietly. In the days that followed, the base slowly returned to normal, though it was a new normal, a changed one. The threat was gone. Pratt was found and dealt with through the proper channels. And the story of what had happened, or at least the sliver of it that could be told, began to circulate among the small circle who knew, and it changed the way they all looked at the quiet captain who read maps. But the thing that had changed most was not the base, it was the relationship between Daniel Cross and Emily Carter. Because they had walked through fire together now. They had started as enemies on a training field, a proud major, and the woman he tried to humiliate, and they had ended as something that ran deeper than friendship, deeper than partnership. They had ended as two people who had seen each other, completely flaws and fears, and buried histories and all, and had chosen anyway to stand together. One evening after it was all over, Cross found Emily on the training ground, where they had held so many of their real conversations, standing in the place where weeks earlier She had put him flat on his back in front of 300 soldiers. He came and stood beside her. You know, he said, I still think about that day. The demonstration, what I did to you. He shook his head. I looked back at the man. I was standing there, so sure of myself, so certain that strength was everything and that you were nobody. And I don't recognize him anymore. I don't want to recognize him. That man isn't gone, Daniel, Emily said gently. He's still in there. He always will be. The fear, the pride, the need to be the strongest one in the room, it doesn't disappear. You just learn to see it and to choose differently. She looked at him. That's all growth ever is. Not becoming someone new. Learning to see yourself clearly enough to make a different choice. Cross was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you saved this base, Emily. You saved all of us. And almost nobody will ever know. The whole thing, the file, the man, the operation, it's all classified. Buried. The soldiers here will never know what you did for them. He looked at her. Does that bother you, that you did all this, risked everything, and you'll never get the recognition? Emily smiled, and it was a real smile, warm and free. Daniel, she said, I spent my whole life doing things nobody would ever know about. Recognition was never why I did any of it. She looked out over the training ground, at the base beyond it, at the thousands of people going about their lives, safe because of a fight they would never know had happened. I did it because they're worth protecting, because that's who I am. And I finally know that now all the way down without needing anyone to tell me. She turned to him. That's the thing Victor Sorensen could never understand. He thought I needed the world to tell me who I was, but I don't. I know who I am, and that's the only recognition that has ever mattered. And standing there in the fading light on the ground where their story had begun in humiliation and pride, the major who had tried to break her, and the captain who had chosen to save him anyway, they understood that they had both been changed forever by what they had walked through together. Cross had learned that true strength had nothing to do with muscle or volume or certainty, and everything to do with the humility to see clearly and the courage to choose well. And Emily had learned that the peace she had been chasing for years was not something she could find by hiding, by disappearing, by burying the person she used to be. It was something she carried inside her all along, waiting for her to stop running long enough to feel it. The quiet map lady, the one everyone had underestimated, the one a proud major had tried to humiliate in front of 300 soldiers, had faced down a ghost from her buried past, had refused the poison of a truth she did not need, and had walked out the other side more whole than she had ever been. Not because she had won a fight, but because she had finally understood that she had never needed to prove anything to anyone, least of all to herself. But being whole, Emily Carter was about to learn, does not mean the world is finished testing you. Because 2 weeks after Victor Sorensen was taken, when the base had settled back into its rhythms and the danger had faded into something that felt almost like a bad dream, a car pulled through the gates of Fort Liberty carrying a passenger no one expected, and that passenger asked at the gate for Captain Emily Carter by name. Whitfield brought the news to Emily himself, and his face was unreadable. There's someone here to see you, he said. Came in an hour ago. Credentials that took me 20 minutes and 3 phone calls to verify, and I'm still not sure I verified them all the way. He paused. Emily, this person is from your old life. The real one, the one nobody talks about. And they say they need to speak with you and only you, and that it can't wait. Emily went very still. She had thought it was over. She had walked out of that staging building, believing that the last thread connecting her to her buried past had been cut. And now here it was again, arriving in a car, asking for her by name, refusing to be turned away. Did they say what it's about? She asked quietly. They said, Whitfield answered carefully, that it's about the things Sorensen didn't get to tell you. The words hit Emily like cold water. The things Sorensen didn't get to tell her. The truth she had refused, standing in that back room, the piece of her own past she had looked at and chosen to walk away from. She had been so proud of that refusal. She had believed it was the moment she became whole. And now someone had come all this way to put that same truth back in front of her, to offer it again, to see if she would take it this time. Where are they? Emily said. They had put the visitor in a secure room, and when Emily walked in, she found an older woman sitting at the table, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the kind of stillness that Emily recognized instantly because she had spent years cultivating it in herself. This was someone from the world of locked files and classified names. This was someone real. Captain Carter, the woman said. Or should I use your other name, the one from before I knew you by that name once, a long time ago? Emily's fine, Emily said, sitting down across from her, keeping her voice level even as her heart pounded. Who are you? My name doesn't matter, and you wouldn't recognize it anyway, the woman said. I ran the program you were part of. Before you left, before you asked to disappear, I was the one who approved your request, actually. I was the one who let you go quiet. She folded her hands on the table. I've kept an eye on you over the years, from a distance. Made sure the door stayed closed the way you wanted it. And then Sorensen escaped, and the door started to open on its own, and I've been watching very closely ever since. Emily's mind was racing. You sent the file, the folder Whitfield gave me. That was you. That was me, the woman confirmed. I sent it to warn you, and I've come now because you did something 2 weeks ago that I need to understand. She leaned forward, and her eyes were intense. You had Sorensen in front of you. You had the truth in your reach. The thing you've wanted your whole life, the piece of yourself that was taken from you. And you walked away from it. You refused it. She studied Emily's face. I've spent 40 years in this business, Emily. I've seen a great many strong people, but I have never not once seen anyone do what you did. Refuse their own truth at the moment it was finally offered. I need to know why. Emily was quiet for a long moment, and then she said simply, because I realized I didn't need it. Because I'd built a life and a self that didn't depend on it. And because I understood standing there that the only power that truth had over me was the power I gave it by wanting it. She looked at the woman. You want to know why I refused? I refused because I finally stopped being afraid of not knowing. That's all. The woman studied her for a long, long moment. And then slowly something changed in her face, something that might have been respect, or might have been sorrow, or might have been both. That's a remarkable thing, she said quietly. And it's exactly why I'm here. Because I have a choice to make, Emily, and your answer just made it for me. She reached into her coat and withdrew a single sealed envelope and set it on the table between them. This contains the truth, the thing Sorensen wanted to tell you, the thing that was taken from your memory years ago in the program. I brought it here to give to you. That was my decision on the drive over. To finally let you have it. Emily stared at the envelope. Her whole body wanted to reach for it. Every cell in her cried out to finally know. But, the woman continued, and she placed her hand flat on top of the envelope, holding it down. You just told me you don't need it. And if that's true, if you meant it, then I want to offer you something instead. I want to offer you the choice you were never given. She looked at Emily steadily. Years ago, that truth was taken from you. You didn't choose to lose it. It was decided for you by people like me for reasons that seemed important at the time. You never got a say. So here's your say, Emily, right now, offered freely. You can take this envelope and finally know. Or you can let me walk out with it and you can stay exactly who you've become, unburdened by a past you've decided you don't need. But this time the choice is yours, not mine, not the program's, not Sorensen's, yours. And Emily Carter sat there looking at the envelope that held the answer to the question that had haunted her whole life, and she understood that this was the real test. Not the training field, not the field exercise, not even the confrontation with Sorensen. This quiet moment with the truth finally within reach and freely offered, no trap attached, no enemy dangling it as bait. Just the truth hers to take. She thought about all of it. The years of not knowing, the locked files, the parts of herself that were classified even to her. The hunger that had lived in her chest for as long as she could remember, the desperate need to understand her own story. And then she thought about the training ground, about Cross learning to see, about the soldiers she had protected, about the life she had built quiet and real out of the person she had chosen to become, rather than the person her buried past had made her. Slowly, Emily reached out, and she pushed the envelope back across the table toward the woman. Take it with you, she said quietly. The woman's eyebrows rose. You're sure this is the only time this offer will ever be made, Emily? Once I walk out that door with this, it's gone. The program will bury it again, and this time it will stay buried forever. You will never have this chance again. You will never know. I know, Emily said. And she smiled, and it was the most peaceful smile she had worn in years. And I'm sure, Because here's the thing I finally understand. That truth in your envelope, it's about who I was. And I spent so many years thinking I couldn't be whole without knowing who I was. She shook her head slowly. But I'm not who I was anymore. I'm who I chose to be. And that person, the one who reads maps and protects soldiers and teaches a proud man to see clearly, that person doesn't need the past to be complete. She's complete already. She built herself out of her own choices, one day at a time, and she's proud of what she built. Emily met the woman's eyes. So take it. Take the truth. I don't need it. I never did. I just had to become someone who understood that. For a long moment, the woman simply looked at her, and then slowly she picked up the envelope and returned it to her coat, and when she looked at Emily again, there was no mistaking the emotion in her weathered face. It was awe, pure, undisguised awe. In 40 years, the woman said quietly, I have taken a great many things from a great many people. Memories, names, whole pieces of who they were. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself it was the cost of the work. She stood slowly, and I have watched so many of them spend the rest of their lives broken by it, searching for what they lost, hollowed out by the not knowing. She looked down at Emily. You're the first one I've ever met who took what was left and built something whole out of it anyway. Something better than what we took. You didn't survive what we did to you, Emily. You transcended it. She extended her hand. It has been an honor, a rare and genuine honor. Emily stood and took her hand. Thank you, she said, for giving me the choice, even if I chose not to take it. That mattered. That mattered more than you know. The woman nodded once and turned and walked to the door. But at the threshold, she paused and she looked back one last time. For what it's worth, she said quietly, the person you were before we took it, before all of it. She would be proud of who you became. I can tell you that much without breaking anything. The person you were would be proud. And then she was gone. Emily stood alone in the secure room for a long time after that, and she found that her eyes were wet, and she let them be because for the first time in her entire adult life, she was not carrying the weight of the question. It was gone, not answered, just gone, released. She had held it out over the edge and opened her hand and let it fall, and instead of feeling emptier, she felt lighter than she had ever felt in her life. When she finally walked out, Cross was waiting for her in the hallway, having heard that a mysterious visitor had come for her, his face tight with the old worry. Emily, he said, crossing to her. Are you all right? Whitfield said someone came, someone from before. What happened? What did they want? Emily looked at him, this man who had started as her tormentor and become her closest ally, and she smiled. They offered me the truth, she said, the whole thing. The thing Sorensen had, the thing that was taken from me. They brought it here in an envelope and put it on the table and told me I could finally know. Cross went very still. And I gave it back, Emily said simply. I told them to take it with them, and they did. It's gone now, Daniel, forever. I'll never know. She said it without a trace of regret, and Cross searched her face for the grief he expected to find there, and could not find it anywhere. How, he said quietly, how could you do that? You wanted to know your whole life, and you had it right there, and you just let it go. Because I finally figured out the thing you've been teaching me without even knowing it, Emily said. You spent weeks learning from me how to read a battlefield, but the whole time you were teaching me something too. Every time you looked at the man you used to be and chose to be different. Every time you set down your pride and picked up humility instead. You were showing me that a person isn't defined by where they came from. They're defined by what they choose every single day. She looked at him. I spent my whole life thinking my past was a locked room I needed to get into to be whole. And you taught me that I could just build a whole new house instead. So I did, and I don't need the old room anymore. I don't even need to know what's in it. Cross stared at her, and slowly a look of profound understanding spread across his face, and underneath it, something that looked a great deal like love, though neither of them would name it that, not yet, maybe not for a long time. You're the strongest person I've ever known, he said quietly. And I don't mean the training field. I don't mean any of that. I mean this, right here. Choosing to let go of the one thing you wanted most because you finally understood you didn't need it. He shook his head. I spent 22 years thinking I understood strength, and it turns out I didn't know the first thing about it until I met you. In the weeks and months that followed, the story of Captain Emily Carter, or at least the pieces of it that could ever be told, slowly wove itself into the fabric of Fort Liberty. Not the classified parts. Those stayed buried the way they had to. But the demonstration on the training field, the one 300 soldiers had witnessed, became a legend that grew with each retelling. The quiet map lady who put the biggest instructor on the base flat on his back. The intelligence officer who beat a major at his own game. The woman everyone underestimated who turned out to be the most remarkable soldier any of them had ever served alongside. But the real change, the one that mattered most, was in Major Daniel Cross. Because the man who had once dragged a quiet woman out in front of 300 soldiers to humiliate her became in the months that followed the loudest advocate on that entire base for the very thing he had once mocked. He stood in front of new recruits and told them again, and again, the lesson he had learned the hard way. That you never know who you're standing next to. That the quiet ones, the ones who don't look like your idea of a warrior, the ones who work behind the screens and speak softly and don't demand attention, might be the most dangerous, most capable, most important people in the room. That strength has nothing to do with size or volume or certainty, and everything to do with discipline and patience and the humility to recognize greatness in others. And every single time he told it as a story about his own failure and about the person who had every right to let him fall and had chosen instead to reach down and offer him her hand. I was wrong, he would tell them, standing tall, unashamed of the admission, because he had learned that admitting you were wrong was not weakness, but the very heart of strength. I looked at a soldier and I decided I already knew everything about her. I decided she was nobody, and she turned out to be the finest officer I have ever served with. She saved my life. She saved this base. And the day I tried to humiliate her was the day I nearly threw away the best thing that ever happened to my career and my character. He would pause and look at the young faces in front of him. Don't be the man I was. Don't ever look at another human being and decide you already know their whole story. Because you don't. You never do. And the person you underestimate today might be the person who saves your life tomorrow. There came a day near the end of it all when Cross finally asked Emily the question he had been carrying for a long time. Do you ever regret it? He said. They were on the training ground again, as they so often were, in the place where their whole story had begun. Any of it coming here trying to be nobody and having it all get ripped open? If I'd never called you out that day, none of it would have happened. You'd still be quiet, still hidden, still at peace. He looked at her. Do you wish I'd left you alone? And Emily thought about it, really thought about it the way she thought about everything. And then she said, no, I don't. And I'll tell you why. She turned to face him. When I came to this base, I thought I was at peace, but I wasn't Daniel. I was hiding, and hiding isn't peace. Hiding is just fear wearing peace as a disguise. She looked out over the base. I was so afraid of who I used to be that I buried her, and I told myself the burial was healing. But it wasn't. I was still a prisoner. Just a prisoner in a quieter cell. She turned back to him, and her eyes were clear. You dragged me out of that cell. You did it cruelly and for the wrong reasons, and I'm not going to pretend that part didn't hurt. But you dragged me out, and out here in the open, I finally found the thing I'd been looking for all along, not by hiding from who I was, but by choosing who I wanted to be out loud in front of everyone where it counted. She smiled. So no, I don't regret it. You broke something open in me that needed to be broken open, and I'm grateful, even for the cruelty, because it led me here. Cross was quiet for a long moment, and then he said roughly, I don't deserve that. I don't deserve to have any of this turn out to be a good thing after what I did. Deserving isn't the point, Daniel, Emily said gently. Nobody gets what they deserve, not the good and not the bad. What matters is what you do with what you are given. You were given a second chance the day I chose to reach down and help you up, instead of leaving you in the dirt. And you didn't waste it. You changed. That's the only thing that was ever in your control, and you did it. She put her hand on his shoulder. That's what makes you worth respecting. Not that you were right, you were dead wrong, but that when you found out you were wrong, you had the courage to become someone better. Most people never manage that, not once in their whole lives. You did it in a matter of weeks. They stood there together, the major and the captain on the ground where he had once tried to break her, and they understood that they had both been given something rare. Not victory, not recognition, something better. They had been given the chance to see clearly, to change, to become more than they had been, and they had taken it. The soldiers of Fort Liberty would tell the story for years to come, the story of the day the major tried to humiliate a quiet woman in front of 300 soldiers, and how she shocked everyone not just with what she could do, but with who she turned out to be. And the ones who told it best always understood that the real shock was never the takedown on the training field. That was just the surface of it. The real shock, the thing that stayed with people, that changed the way they looked at the quiet ones in their own lives, was the deeper truth underneath. That the woman everyone dismissed had walked through fire, faced down her own buried past, been offered the one thing she wanted most in the world, and had the strength to set it down and walk away, because she had finally understood that she was already completely enough. Emily Carter never did learn what was in that envelope. She never learned the things Sorensen wanted to tell her, the piece of her past that was taken from her memory all those years ago. And in the end, that not knowing became the truest measure of her strength. Because anyone can chase after the answers. Anyone can spend a lifetime trying to fill in the blank spaces of who they are. But it takes a rare and extraordinary kind of person to look at the empty space, understand that they will never fill it, and choose to build a whole and meaningful life anyway. That was who Captain Emily Carter was. Not the woman behind the screens, not the map lady, not even the deadly operator from the files no one could read. She was the woman who had every reason to be broken and chose to be whole. The woman everyone underestimated, who turned out to be the strongest person any of them had ever known. The soldier who taught a proud man that real strength was never about looking down on others, but about having the humility to recognize greatness wherever it hides, and the courage to reach down and lift another person up, even when they have done nothing to deserve it. The major tried to humiliate her in front of 300 soldiers, and in the end, she didn't just shock them. She changed every single one of them forever. That is the true measure of strength, and that is a lesson that will outlive them all.